The storm howls outside the Gothic spires of the castle, lightning illuminating the darkness like a jagged scar across the sky. A woman gasps as a bone-deep chill settles into her marrow, her eyes fluttering open to find herself at the feet of a man whose presence is as suffocating as it is godlike. He towers over her, a glass of wine in his hand and a predatory glint in his crimson eyes as he mocks her sudden bravery. Her heart hammers against her ribs, her mind a chaotic whirlpool as she clutches her head in confusion. She realizes she is no longer in her own world, but draped in the silk and lace of a highborn lady, a sign that her desperate gamble for revival has succeeded. In her previous life, she was merely Belle, a woman who worked herself to the grave at the age of 27. In the sterile silence of her final moments, a celestial system appeared like a digital phantom, offering her a second chance within a novel. Fearing the void, she accepted the contract, and a small, mischievous creature manifested to guide her through this new, dangerous reality. She has been thrust into the dark pages of a story titled The Aristocratic Beast's Best Pet. Waking in a room of cold opulence, she initially believes she has found the hero, only for the system to reveal the terrifying truth. The man before her is Duke Agnes, the Empire's most feared villain. She trembles, questioning her role in this unfolding tragedy. While the Duke's eyes, cold as the void, track her every movement, she desperately hopes to be more than a sacrificial lamb in this story. The Wratham family is cursed by ancient black magic, a stain on their blood that turns them into mindless, bloodthirsty monsters when they are overwhelmed by emotion. The system cruelly reminds her that she is a mere passerby, a minor noble lady named Belle with a pretty face but no power. Despite her stunning beauty, she is destined to be a footnote in the lives of the true protagonists. At Grand Feast, the seeds of betrayal are being sown by Sasha, the heroine's envious sister. Driven by a toxic obsession, Sasha plots to destroy her sister Heidi's reputation. She has drugged the Duke and Heidi, intending to orchestrate a scandal that will ruin them both. The MC's mission is a desperate one. She must stop the scandal by taking Heidi's place and quelling the Duke's cursed rage. Fear turns her blood to ice as the system conveniently vanishes when she needs it most. Alone in the Duke's private chambers, she faces his murderous intent as he demands to know who sent her. He looms over her, his voice a low, threatening growl. Vines of magical energy seem to constrict the air as he reaches for her, his touch sending a jolt of terror through her frame. He mocks her silence, questioning if she is too afraid to even beg for her life. He acknowledges her beauty but dismisses it as a common tool for seduction. He pins her against the window, the lightning flashing behind his silver hair, as he threatens to crush her like a fragile glass doll. She struggles to remember the plot, her mind racing for a way to survive his lethal mood. He commands her to be useful, to act as the antidote to the madness boiling in his cursed blood. He seizes her, his strength overwhelming. Panic flares in her eyes as she realizes the proximity of death. In a final act of desperation, she cries out that she has a way to eliminate his curse forever. The Duke freezes, his curiosity piqued by her impossible claim. Out, the rain lashes against the stone walls. He demands she speak the truth, his grip on her wrist like a shackle. She knows the curse forces the Wratham men to seek the blood of their victims like monsters. Seeing no other way, she picks up a shard of broken crystal and slices her own palm. She offers her blood to the starving tyrant, the pain a sharp reminder of her fragile mortality. Arges is stunned, his predatory gaze fixed on her sacrifice as he realizes she knows secrets no outsider should possess. He is a man forged in loneliness, abandoned by his mother and raised among the whispers of a hateful court. He stands as a dark, statuesque figure of vengeance. He questions her motives, his eyes narrowing as he looks at the crimson staining her skin. He wonders if she is a brave woman or merely a foolhardy one. Internally, she weeps at the absurdity of her situation and the foolishness of the system. She maintains her innocence, claiming she only wishes to expose the true architect of this night. In the original timeline, Sasha had succeeded, leading the nobility to catch Arges in a moment of monstrous bloodlust. That night, he'd been found over the body of a dying woman, an act that led to his total social exile and eventual ruin. To avoid this fate, she warns him of Sasha's imminent arrival with the other nobles. He is skeptical, but she paints a vivid picture of the social destruction that awaits them both. She begs him to take her blood and let her go before the trap is sprung. He finally releases her, but his warning is clear. If she is lying, he will find her even if she hides in the depths of the earth. Back at the feast, the protagonist Sillism remains oblivious to the shadows moving around him. Sasha suddenly bursts into the hall, her face a mask of false agony as she cries out that her sister has been kidnapped, setting her final trap in motion. The heavy silence of the palace chambers was a suffocating shroud. Her hand was slick with crimson, the pain a sharp, jagged reminder of her desperate escape. Her vision blurred, a feverish heat rising to her head as the world began to tilt. Dragging her body across the cold floor, her red dress fanned out like a dying rose as she pleaded for a salvation that seemed out of reach. Her feet trembled in her elegant heels, her strength failing with every agonizing inch. With a final, ragged breath, she collapsed into the darkness. A gentle voice pierced the void as a girl found her broken form and offered a hand of mercy. Outside, the storm howled, and the sound of heavy boots echoed through the corridor like a death knell. A frantic crowd gathered before the Duke's door, whispers of kidnapping and betrayal dancing in the air. Sasha watched the chaos, her eyes gleaming with a predatory satisfaction as she anticipated the fall of her rival. The doors were thrown open by a man desperate for answers. Inside, the white-haired tyrant sat upon his chair with the terrifying stillness of a god. He looked upon the intruders with a gaze so cold it could freeze the blood in their veins. His eyes were shards of rubies, devoid of any human warmth. A search was commanded, the air thick with tension. Lightning tore through the sky, illuminating the Duke's bored expression as the intruders ransacked his sanctuary. Soldiers overturned the furniture, their frantic movements a stark contrast to the Duke's calm. Sasha's breath hitched, her face contorting in shock when the search yielded nothing but dust and shadows. Her hand shook with a sudden, icy fear. Hill tried to offer comfort, but the Duke's presence loomed over them like a silent predator. Rose from his seat, his every movement a display of absolute power. He stood by the window, the rain lashing against the glass as he looked down upon them with lethal disdain. With a sharp ring of a bell, he summoned his butler and gave the heartless command to sell his aggressors into the slave market. The room erupted in pleas for mercy, but the Duke was a man of stone, his gaze fixed on the storm. His cloak billowed behind him, a dark omen of the vengeance to come. The onlookers trembled, realizing too late that they had walked into the lion's den. He ordered his men to find the woman who had dared to enter his room, his red eyes burning with a dark, obsessive curiosity. He sat back down, a king of shadows waiting for his prey. But this tragedy was rooted in a past life, one that began in a lonely cradle. She had been a child of misfortune, raised in the crossfire of her parents' hatred. Her father was a monster who gambled away her future. She spent her youth in a daze of exhaustion, working to pay for a man who never loved her. The weight of her existence was a crushing burden. Even when she thought she found love, it was snatched away in the cold glow of city lights. Her heart was shattered as her lover chose his family's status over her devotion. Then, the darkness finally claimed her as her heart gave out under the weight of overwork. She died alone, a discarded thing in a world that never wanted her. But the end was merely a beginning as she woke in a bed of silk and starlight. Her head throbbed as she realized she was inhabiting a stranger's body. She was a ghost in someone else's skin. Her wounds were gone, and a girl with eyes like emeralds smiled at her with genuine worry. Belle looked around the lavish room, her heart pounding with confusion. Heidi explained how she had tended to her kindness a balm to Belle's weary soul. The memories of her past life's misery flickered like a dying candle. She made a silent vow to live for herself, to never let the world break her again. Reached out to check her fever, her warmth radiating a sincerity that Belle had never known. A deep sense of gratitude filled her chest. Belle introduced herself, the name feeling foreign on her tongue. The girl introduced herself as Heidi Mountbatten. Belle's heart stopped. She was looking at the tragic heroine of this world, a girl discarded by her own father. Heidi had been a ghost at the banquets of the elite, a lonely soul in a sea of gold. In that moment, they were two kindred spirits finding solace in each other. But a cruel system manifested before Belle's eyes, warning her that friendship with the heroine was a death sentence. Belle stared in stunned silence as the system threatened to erase her. She forced herself to turn cold, the light dying in her eyes as she pushed Heidi away. Heidi recoiled, her heart breaking at the sudden rejection. She fled the room, leaving Belle alone with the mocking laughter of the system. The punishment for her failure was already in motion. A maid burst through the doors, her voice trembling as she delivered the news that would change everything. The Earl of Crone was dead. The sky hung heavy with the weight of unshed tears as dark clouds gathered over the spires of the grand estate. Inside, the air was thick with the suffocating scent of lilies and the hushed whispers of nobility as they stood before the coffin of Earl Crone. The guests murmured amongst themselves, their voices a jagged chorus of judgment as they watched the young heiress. They questioned if a mere girl could carry the weight of a fallen house, noting her lack of tears with suspicious eyes. Belle stood motionless, her face a mask of practiced indifference, while her mind raced with the warnings of a system that threatened to strip away her only supporter if she failed her role. She knew this was a second life, a scripted tragedy where her father's death was a predetermined point in a cruel novel. She recalled the hidden history of her family, starting with her mother, a dancer of radiant beauty who had captured the Earl's heart at first sight. Their love had been a whirlwind that ended in the cold reality of childbirth, leaving a grieving husband and a newborn daughter. The Earl had sought solace in the bottom of a bottle, his once noble spirit drowning in alcohol as he abandoned his lands. Everything changed the day 5-year-old Belle wandered too close to the edge of the lake. The Earl had awakened from his stupor, panic surging through his veins like wildfire as he screamed her name and raced toward the shore. He watched in horror as the branch gave way, his only reason for living vanishing beneath the surface. He dove into the icy depths, his heart hammering against his ribs as he fought to pull her from a watery grave. As they huddled together on the bank, he promised to never let his demons take him from her again. He tried to rebuild their world, even bringing a new woman into their lives to fill the void of a mother. For a time, the masquerade of a happy family held, with bedtime stories and smiles captured in gilded frames. But now, standing behind the funeral carriage, the illusion was shattered. Her stepmother leaned in with a voice like honeyed poison, offering comfort while a sinister smirk played on her lips when no one was looking. Belle felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind, her stomach knotting with hunger and a growing sense of dread as she was pressured to maintain her image. Seeking a moment of peace, she slipped away from the prying eyes of the maids. Her breath hitched when she overheard voices behind a heavy door, the unmistakable sound of her stepmother plotting with the senior servant, Ash. They spoke of her inheritance with such venom, calling her a nuisance and planning to seize the crown legacy for themselves. Shock sent a ring slipping from her trembling fingers, the clatter against the floor sounding like a thunderclap in the silence. Fear paralyzed her as the door creaked open, Ash's predatory eyes searching the hallway for the intruder. Belle fled, her heart thumping like a trapped bird as she rounded a corner and slammed into a chest as solid as marble. She clutched her aching nose, looking up to find herself staring into a pair of piercing, blood-red eyes. It was Arges, the statuesque villain of the original story, his presence radiating an aura of lethal grace. She sank to the floor, her legs turning to water as his shadow loomed over her. He was a god-like figure of terror, his gaze stripping away her secrets. When she tried to scramble away, his hand clamped around her wrist with the strength of iron. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous vibration as he asked if he truly frightened her that much. Belle felt trapped, her mind spinning as she realized the system's logic had brought this monster her father's funeral. Arges spoke of a night at a banquet, a night where she had been drugged and ended up in his private quarters. He pinned her against the wall, his proximity suffocating as he questioned how she knew the details of a conspiracy she shouldn't have been aware of. Outside, the search party grew closer, their calls for Lady Belle echoing through the halls. Arges pulled her into the shadows, his hand covering her mouth as he pressed his body against hers to hide them. He whispered a chilling threat into her ear, warning her that one sound would lead to her being buried alongside her father. As she trembled beneath his touch, she saw her stepmother and Ash in the distance, already dividing the spoils of her life. The realization of their greed burned in her chest, but it was the man holding her who truly terrified her. Arges let out a soft, dark chuckle, his smirk widening as he told her that the web she was caught in was far more complex than she could ever imagine. In the gilded heart of the Empire, the laws of inheritance are as rigid as the stone walls of the palace, requiring a noble to be of age and witnessed by the elite before they can claim their birthright. The heavy weight of a sword upon a kneeling knight's shoulder signifies a sacred pledge of allegiance, a bond of blood and honor that few dare to break. Yet, for a young heir left in the wake of tragedy, the law adds a dangerous loophole, the appointment of a senior famber to manage the estate, a position that invites the greediest of wolves to the door. Within the cold, echoing halls of the Count's manor, the air grew thick with tension as the ambitious Mrs. Karen demanded entry into forbidden chambers. Her eyes flashed with a terrifying, murderous light when the servants dared to mention the late Count's orders, her patience wearing thin as she bared her claws. She shrieked her dominance into the faces of the trembling maids, declaring herself the absolute lady of the house with a voice that brooked no defiance. The servants could only huddle together in fear, sensing the shift in power as the shadows of the estate grew longer and more suffocating. Behind closed doors, the stepmother's lover whispered poison into her ear, celebrating the Count's death and the vast fortune that was now within their grasp. Her internal monologue was even more venomous, as she cursed the years she had wasted and vowed that the Count's daughter would pay for every second of her perceived suffering. With a sinister touch, the man promised to help her dismantle the house from within. Their first move was a calculated strike against the young Belle, plotting to marry her off as quickly as possible, to strip her of her inheritance. Mrs. Karen's face contorted into a mask of cruel satisfaction as she envisioned the girl's downfall. Belle, however, was no longer the helpless child they remembered. Her heart burned with a quiet, fierce rage as she watched their disgusting display of greed. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted as the statuesque and intimidating Arges appeared, his crimson eyes cutting through the darkness like a blade. He noted her dire situation with a cold, knowing smirk that made her breath hitch in her throat. Belle felt a wave of panic wash over her, her mind racing to maintain her composure under his suffocating gaze. He spoke of secrets he had overheard, his voice dropping to a dangerous, velvet low that sent shivers down her spine. Leaning in close enough for her to feel the heat of his presence, he touched her chin and compared her beauty to that of a famous dancer, a woman who had once captivated the entire empire. His advice was a chilling warning: beautiful flowers are always the first to be picked, and she needed to be wary of the hands reaching for her petals. Belle was left breathless and trembling, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird as he vanished into the shadows. The day of the funeral arrived under a weeping, leaden sky, the graveyard a sea of somber gray. Belle stood before her father's headstone, her eyes filled with a grief that she had to keep private, whispering a vow to protect his legacy and his lands at any cost. Her stepmother's performance was nauseating, dabbing at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief and offering hollow words of comfort about destiny. Belle played the part of the grieving, submissive daughter, though her soul recoiled at the woman's touch. The arrival of a special guest, Mrs. Arundel, brought a new chill to the air. This woman was the king's most precious mistress, a former maid of honor who had climbed to power by stepping over her masters. She had secured her position by bearing the king's only son, Prince George, and she moved with the predatory grace of a queen in all but name. The system's voice rang in Belle's mind, a digital warning that this woman's target was none other than Belle herself. Mrs. Arundel greeted her with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, praising her beauty with a tone that felt like a hidden threat. Belle felt the suffocating weight of the two women's hypocrisy as they discussed the beauty of the soul while plotting her ruin. The trap was finally sprung when the stepmother suggested a marriage to the Marquis of Arundel, George. It was a masterstroke of malice. Under imperial law, marriage for a female heir was considered a waiver of her inheritance. An invitation to the king's birthday banquet was thrust upon her, a golden ticket to her own social execution. Belle's heart hammered as the system forcibly activated a new mission, its blue screens glowing with a demand she couldn't refuse. She remembered the near-death experience of the last mission and felt a cold sweat break out. Yet system gave her no choice, automatically accepting the task to confess to the hero Syl. As the funeral concluded and the week of the banquet loomed, Belle felt like a chess piece moved by unseen hands. Her stepmother sat like a grand master at a board, confident that every piece was in its place for the upcoming party. Belle felt the walls closing in, her internal panic reaching a fever pitch as she realized she had been cast in a role she never asked for. Retreating to her study, she was greeted by a mountain of account books brought by the estate's manager. The sheer volume was enough to make anyone despair, but Belle leaned on the memories of her past life as a modern office worker, her soul forged in the fires of overtime and corporate stress. She desperately searched for a way to inherit the title early, knowing she needed to present a gift of extraordinary value to the king to win his favor. The financial deficit of the territory hung over her like a guillotine, a problem the stepmother had cultivated to keep her weak. Her small system companion, Lolo, tried to cheer her up with talk of rewards in the system mall, but Belle was focused on the danger posed by Syl, the second most dangerous man in the novel. The system explained that she was a bug in the original plot, a character who had changed her fate and now possessed golden fingers that protect her from the original script's death flags. This revelation brought a spark of hope. If the original plot couldn't kill her, she only had to survive her stepmother's schemes to live a happy life. But the peace was short-lived when a maid announced the arrival of the eldest son of the Wratham family. Arges sat in the reception room, his presence so commanding it seemed to shrink the very walls around him. He didn't wait for an invitation, his cold gaze fixed on the door as Belle entered. He sat sipping tea with a godlike composure, his every movement radiating power and hidden intent. Belle's mind raced with annoyance and fear, wondering why this dangerous man continued to haunt her doorstep. The silence between them was heavy, a physical pressure that made the air feel thin. When he finally set down his cup and declared that he was there to pay her back, Belle's eyes widened in shock, her hands clenching her dress as she realized the game had just become infinitely more dangerous. The sun hung low over the sprawling, icy elegance of Earl Karen's manor, a place where beauty masked a deadly chill. Heidi stood as a vision of defiance in her crimson gown, her golden hair cascading like silk over her shoulders. When she greeted her stepmother, the air grew heavy with unspoken malice, the older woman's presence as suffocating as a coiled serpent. Heidi offered a practiced, radiant smile that never reached her eyes, playing the part of the perfect, submissive daughter to survive the viper's nest. As she prepared to depart for the market, the head butler bowed with a stiffness that hinted at the manor's rigid secrets, while the stepmother watched Eve with a gaze that promised a storm. No sooner had the carriage wheels turned than the stepmother's facamboled, her voice sharp as a blade as she ordered the maids to ransack Heidi's chambers for the precious honey. She paced like a predator, her heart black with the desire to seize the territory and cast the girl into ruin. Far from the gilded cages of the capital, the Janus region was a desolate expanse of rugged roads and biting winds. Heidi watched the impoverished market through the carriage window, her mind racing with calculations to save her future. The villagers were shadows of people worn down by neglect and heavy taxes. Stepping into the dusty square, Heidi moved with a grace that felt otherworldly in such a bleak setting. She ignored the butler's protests, her eyes fixed on the financial ruin she was determined to overturn. The market was a symphony of desperation. A sudden crash echoed through the alley as a basket of beets was kicked aside by a cruel merchant. An old woman collapsed in the dirt, her face a mask of agony as she pleaded for mercy for her dying grandson. The merchant loomed over her, his laughter a jagged sound as he wished death upon the child. He barked at her to vanish, his eyes devoid of any human warmth. As the woman began to crawl away in shame, a voice like clear bells commanded them to stop. Heidi brushed past her panicked butler, her silhouette a beacon of justice. She knelt in the dirt, her delicate fingers picking up a discarded beet with a smile that could melt the coldest heart. She asked the woman if she was hurt, her voice a soothing balm. With a flourish of gold, she offered to buy every single beet the woman possessed. The butler sputtered in horror at the mention of such low-class food, but Heidi silenced him with a single, freezing look, asserting her absolute ownership before pressing a gold coin into the woman's trembling palm. High above on a wooden walkway, a cloaked figure watched the scene with intense, violet eyes. Lord Searle, the second son of Duke Rassam, stood like a silent god, his heart stirring at the sight of the girl's unexpected kindness. He was a man of cold logic, yet as he gazed at her, he felt a strange, protective urge take root. He decided then that such a pure soul had no place in the dark schemes of the court, and he would shield her from the shadows. The carriage eventually returned to the grand estate. As Heidi stepped onto the gravel, her mind was already weaving a tapestry of trade and industry. She walked through the gardens, reflecting on the untapped potential of the humble beets and the lack of luxury goods in the region. She'd been bustling stalls and overflowing granaries. But the moment she crossed the threshold of the manor, the atmosphere shifted to one of terror. She demanded to know her stepmother's whereabouts, only to be met with the sight of guards dragging a maid away. The poor girl collapsed on the polished floor, her cries echoing through the hall. It was Belle, Heidi's only confidant, who clung to her skirts and begged for salvation. The stepmother emerged from the shadows, her lips curled in a triumphant sneer. She accused the maid of stealing the king's honey, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of the trap. Heidi's heart hammered against her ribs as she realized the depth of the betrayal. She saw the stepmother for the monster she was, a woman who would destroy innocent life just to isolate her prey. Belle's desperate pleas for her innocence were met with cold silence. The stepmother demanded the girl's hands be severed as a warning, her cruelty knowing no bounds. Thinking quickly, Heidi stepped forward, her voice steady as she offered to take charge of the punishment herself, playing on the stepmother's desire to see her become a heartless noble. The older woman relented, leaving the hall with a satisfied flick of her fan. Alone with the trembling maid, Heidi's mask finally slipped. She whispered that she knew the truth, but that the manor was no longer safe. With a heavy heart, she commanded Belle to flee the estate and never look back, promising to protect her from afar. Her gaze turned toward the window, her eyes burning with a cold, murderous fire as she vowed to purge the vipers from her home. She lamented the hard path she had to walk, wishing for the easy life of a storybook heroine. Meanwhile, at the estate of Mountbatten, a different kind of storm was brewing. Sasha, Heidi's half-sister, screamed in a fit of jealous rage, hurling her treasures across the room. She ordered the servants to vanish, her face contorted with hatred. The maids fled in terror from the girl's volatile temper. Jewels lay scattered like broken dreams upon the rug. Her mother entered, her expression one of weary disappointment as Sasha raved about Heidi's return. The girl's eyes were wild with the fear that her sister would steal her status and her suitors. Her mother sighed, reminding her that she was the one who had blundered by framing Heidi so poorly. Sasha threw herself into her mother's arms, sobbing that the country bumpkin would bring only disgrace to their name. The mother stroked her hair, promising that Sasha would always be the favorite, the golden child of the family. She explained that Heidi was merely a pawn to be used and discarded in their political games. Sasha's obsession turned to Lord Searle, her voice a hiss of possessive longing. Her mother laughed, calling the man a mere piece on a chessboard and urging her daughter to aim higher. She praised Sasha's magical talent, envisioning her as the most honorable princess of the empire. In the hallway, a young girl stood frozen, the tray of sweets in her hands trembling as she overheard the venomous plot against the sister she once knew. The sun hung high over the sprawling crone estate as a lavish carriage pulled to a halt, signaling the return of the young lady. Stepping onto the gravel with the grace of a swan, Belle was greeted by her butler, her gown a vibrant splash of crimson against the manicured gardens. Her mind drifted to the state of Janus, a territory that felt small and neglected despite its untapped potential. It was a place where basic needs like bread and simple produce were the only commerce, leaving no room for the luxuries of the capital. The lack of even the simplest seafood spoke of region cut off from the world's bounty, a puzzle she intended to solve. As she crossed the threshold of the mansion, the rhythmic click of her heels echoed through the marble halls. The servants bowed, their voices hushed, but Belle immediately noticed the absence of her mother. A young maid trembled before her, the girl's face a mask of terror that suggested something was terribly wrong. Suddenly, A piercing command to arrest a servant shattered the silence of the corridor. The poor girl collapsed at Belle's feet, clutching at her skirt and begging for mercy as the Countess approached. Belle's gaze sharpened, her violet eyes narrowing as she sensed the underlying malice in the air. The stepmother stood tall, accusing the girl of a crime that didn't fit her character, but Belle's voice cut through the accusations like a blade, demanding absolute silence. It was then revealed that a jar of precious honey, a gift from a high-ranking noble, had supposedly been stolen, though Belle knew this was merely a ploy to strip her of her leverage at the upcoming royal banquet. She looked at the woman who called herself mother, recognizing the cold calculation behind her false concern. When the stepmother suggested a punishment as cruel as cutting off the girl's hands, Belle stepped in, her voice smooth as silk as she requested to handle the discipline herself. Playing the part of the obedient, dependent daughter, she allowed the Countess to believe she was merely following her lead. As the stepmother swept away, satisfied with her perceived dominance, Belle watched her go with a heart of ice. Turning back to the maid, she commanded her to rise, telling her that for her own safety, she must leave the estate and never return. The maid's heart broke, thinking she was being discarded, but Belle, her touch gentle, as she explained that this was the only way to shield her from the coming storm. She knew she was in a precarious position, unable to protect even those closest to her while the stepmother's web continued to tighten. Her resolve hardened. She would endure this farce until the day she inherited her title and could finally purge the vipers from her home. She felt the weight of her struggle, envying the heroines of stories whose lives seemed to flow like a calm river compared to her treacherous path. Meanwhile, at the Mountbatten estate, a different kind of chaos reigned as Belle's sister threw a violent tantrum. Jewels and chests were hurled across the room in a fit of jealous rage. The servants fled in terror, leaving the young girl to her screaming fit. The stepmother entered, her expression one of weary disappointment as she surveyed the wreckage. She scolded her daughter for her recklessness, reminding her that her behavior had already led to her being grounded. The sisters' face twisted with hatred, blaming Belle for every misfortune that had befallen her. The Countess sighed, telling her that framing Belle had been a tactical error that only angered their father. Pulling the girl into a deceptive embrace, she whispered that she would always be the favorite child. She revealed the cruel truth. Belle was nothing more than a pawn to be used against the Rassam family. The sisters' jealousy flared again at the mention of the handsome Searle, but her mother dismissed him as a mere piece on a chessboard. She looked at her daughter with a chilling pride, declaring that she was destined for the throne while Belle was meant to be a disposable tool. She promised that the girl's magical talent would eventually make her the most honored princess in the empire. Her words were a poison, feeding the girl's ego and cementing their dark alliance. Nearby, a young girl trembled as she held a tray of sweets, having overheard the entire wicked conversation. Back at the mansion, the stepmother's fury reached a boiling point when she learned that a prince had bestowed a gift upon Belle. She gnashed her teeth, her face contorting with a rage that bordered on madness. The image of the statuesque prince, cold and godlike, Haunty wondered how Belle had managed to charm such a powerful man. Her insults turned toward Belle's birth mother, a mere dancer. As she seed o'er the girl's growing influence, she looked at a portrait of the girl, seeing the ghost of the woman she had replaced. Her butler, Foreman, stepped forward with a sinister smile, claiming he had a plan to neutralize the threat. He whispered his dark scheme into the Countess's ear, a plan that would surely lead to Belle's downfall. The stepmother's eyes lit up with wicked delight as she informed a maid of Belle's upcoming territory inspection. The maid bowed, knowing that this mission was a trap designed to isolate the young lady. Belle stood ready the next morning, her presence luminous and intimidating as she prepared to face whatever awaited her. The exchange between her and the stepmother was a masterpiece of hidden daggers, each smiling through their teeth like a snake facing a rooster. As butler Foreman escorted her to the carriage, Belle maintained her mask of calm, though her heart pounded with the knowledge of his betrayal. The stepmother watched from above, her heart swelling with the belief that she had finally rid herself of the arrogant brat. She touched her ring, a smile touching her lips as she prepared for the real show to begin. Her first act was to command a total search of Belle's chambers, desperate to find the hidden honey. She stood on the balcony, her gaze sweeping over the estate she intended to claim for her own unborn child while studying the map of the remote north. The journey to the northern region of Genis was long, the documentation just how far Belle was being sent from the safety of the capital. Rattled through the cobblestone streets of a town that time seemed to have forgotten. The residents looked hollow and tired, their lives a constant struggle against poverty. Peering through the curtains, Belle saw the stark reality of the deficit that plagued her future lands. She stepped out into the air, her mind already calculating a long-term strategy to save the people she would one day rule. Her steps were purposeful, her eyes scanning the marketplace for any sign of hope. Suddenly, the peace was shattered by a man's cruel shouting as he harassed an elderly woman. A basket of beetroots was kicked over, the red vegetables rolling into the dirt. The man loomed over her, claiming the market stall was his alone. The old woman begged for mercy, her voice shaking as she explained she needed money for her granddaughter's medicine. only to be told to die in the gutter. The man's face was a mask of derision, his laughter echoing through the square. He mocked her meager goods, claiming that no one in their right mind would ever buy such trash. Belle's voice rang out, commanding him to wait, her presence suddenly suffocating the man's arrogance. Butler Foreman looked on in shock, his composure breaking as he realized his charge was deviating from the plan. Belle walked straight past him, her head held high, ignoring his frantic protests. She knelt beside the old woman, her smile as warm as the sun as she helped her to her feet. With a calm authority that left the crowd breathless, she announced that she would buy every single beetroot. The old woman's eyes filled with tears of disbelief, while the butler's paled with anxiety. When he dared to protest that such food was unfit for a noble, Belle turned a freezing glare upon him, reminding him exactly who was the master and who was the servant. As she looked out over the vast fields of beetroots, a secret plan began to take shape in her mind. She would turn this humble crop into the very thing that would save her people and destroy her enemies. Belle walked through the bustling streets, her mind racing with a plan to transform humble beetroots into liquid gold sugar. High above on a bridge, a presence lingered, a shadow watching her every move. It was Syl Latham, the hero of this world, his gaze as sharp and cold as a winter's dawn beneath his hood. Belle paused, a shiver racing down her spine as if unseen eyes were boring into her. Yet when she turned, the bridge stood hauntingly empty. Within his carriage, Syl's resolve was as impenetrable as stone, refusing to hunt her for answers despite his companion's urging. His eyes, deep and calculating, remained fixed on the distance as they rode away. He reclined with a predatory grace, weighing the rumors of Sasha's treachery against the girl he had just seen. He would not drag another innocent soul into the blood-soaked mess of the high nobility just to satisfy a curiosity. The carriage finally rattled to a halt before the towering, opulent gates of the Count's mansion. Belle stepped out with the grace of a queen, her hand resting lightly on her butler's as she returned to the lion's den. As she walked through the manicured gardens, she mapped out the territory's potential, seeing opportunity where others saw only dirt. She envisioned a thriving market filled with essentials, balancing the lack of seafood against the abundance of livestock in the inland region. If she played her cards right, Janice would flourish under her hand. The heavy doors of the estate groaned open to welcome her back, but the air inside was thick with a suffocating tension. Suddenly, a scream pierced the silence as a maid was thrown violently to the floor, accused of a crime she didn't commit. The poor girl scrambled toward Belle, clutching at her skirts and begging for salvation. Her stepmother stood there, a vision of icy elegance and hidden malice. With a voice like silk wrapped around a blade, the woman claimed the maid had been caught thieving Belle's personal treasures. The maid looked up, her eyes wide with a terror that only the truly helpless know. Desperately, she pointed a trembling finger at the head maid, swearing she was only following orders to change the bedding. The stepmother's face twisted in fury, but Belle's voice cut through the air, demanding know exactly what had been stolen. It was the rare honey gifted by the Lathams, a prize far too valuable for a mere servant. The stepmother smiled, claiming she was merely keeping the precious item safe for Belle. Belle's heart hardened. She knew this was a calculated move to strip her of her influence before she could present it to the Emperor. The maid wept, swearing her lifelong loyalty to the only mistress she had ever known. The stepmother's eyes gleamed with a sadistic light as she suggested cutting off the girl's hands as a warning. But Belle coolly insisted on handling the punishment herself. With a final sharp warning to show no mercy, the older woman turned away, leaving the room with the swish of her heavy skirts. Belle knelt beside the trembling girl, her voice a soft command to stand. Though she spoke of sending the girl away, her eyes held a hidden depth of compassion. She turned her back, appearing cold to any prying eyes. But in a low whisper, she revealed the truth. She was not casting her out, but hiding her from the vipers to come. Belle looked her in the eye, promising that this was only a temporary retreat to keep her safe. The maid worried for Belle's safety, but the young lady's resolve was unshakable as she declared everything was under control. Her small fairy companion chirped in concern, yet Belle knew she could not protect anyone while she herself was still vulnerable. She would overhaul every treacherous soul in this house once she claimed her title. She envied the simple path of a heroine, one where the world bent to her will without the need for such exhausting schemes. Far across the estate, the Mountbatten mansion loomed, echoing with the sounds of a violent tantrum as gems and jewelry were hurled across the room. The stepmother entered the chaos, dismissing the terrified servants with a flick of her wrist. They fled like before a flame. She looked upon her daughter, who was drowning in a sea of jealousy and rage. The woman's presence was suffocating, her blue gown shimmering with an almost predatory light. The girl gnashed her teeth, cursing Belle's return and the way she had stolen Syl's attention. The stepmother commanded her to sit, her voice a chilling anchor in the girl's storm of emotion. She cradled her daughter, whispering that Belle was nothing more than a country bumpkin, a shame to their noble blood. To her, the other daughter was merely a tool to keep the house in check. She held her favorite child close, fueling her fire with promises of greatness. When the girl cried out for the man she loved, the mother dismissed Syl as nothing more than a pawn in a much larger game. She looked at her daughter with cold, calculating pride, telling her she was destined to be the Empire's most revered princess because of her magic. Outside the door, a lone figure stood trembling, a tray of sweets shaking in her hands as she overheard the heartless truth. In the hallways, the servants whispered of strange behavior, mocking her for the mud and roots she brought from the slums. They laughed at her expense, unaware of the power she was quietly gathering. Their gossip was cut short as the stepmother and her butler appeared, their shadows stretching long across the floor. Shivered in terror, scurrying away like frightened mice. The stepmother watched them go, a bad feeling gnawing at her gut, even as her butler tried to reassure her that Belle could never make waves for the Emperor's banquet. Inside the humble kitchen, Belle focused her entire being on the task at hand, her slender hands gripping the wooden spoon as she stirred the contents of a massive pot. Beside her, the small spirit Lolo acted as a walking encyclopedia, detailing the arduous process of extracting syrup from sugarcane or beetroot to create pure granules. Belle admitted that while she had studied the theory in ancient texts, this was her first time attempting the delicate transformation, her eyes shining with hope. When the spirit questioned the possibility of failure, she merely smiled, asserting that the first step was the only way to reach success. Her determination radiated from her as the process continued, the sun setting and rising over the estate while she worked tirelessly. Finally, a soft gasp escaped her lips as she revealed a handful of pristine, shimmering white sugar, a triumph that made Lolo erupt in a shower of celebratory confetti. The spirit confessed that he had chosen to bond with her because of this rare, unyielding persistence in the face of impossible challenges. As Lolo playfully tried to touch the glittering granules, Belle couldn't help but tease him, her playful spirit masking the heist of her plan. A moment of annoyance flickered across her face as they bickered like friends, but her focus quickly returned to the future. With this sugar as a gift for the Emperor, she would finally secure her father's title. The day of the Emperor's birthday banquet arrived with a grandeur that felt suffocating, the palace grounds teeming with opulent carriages and the elite of the Empire. Dressed in a gown of deep blue lace, Belle followed her mother toward the entrance, guided by a stiff-backed servant. She noted with a bitter internal sigh how the royal court blatantly categorized its guests, a sentiment her mother quickly hushed, warning her that such casual talk about the royals was dangerous. They paused as a magnificent carriage arrived, and the Emperor himself stepped out to welcome the powerful Mountbatten family, a sight that emphasized the vast divide in status. Belle's mother pulled her along, her grip firm as she reminded her daughter to maintain decorum. The heavy doors creaked open, but they were led through a side entrance, a stinging reminder of their current social standing compared to the titans of the nobility. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the desperate energy of nobles scrambling to curry favor with those of higher rank. Her mother eventually left her side to greet a high-ranking lady, leaving Belle with a strict command not to wander off into the crowd. Belle accepted a glass of wine from a passing tray, her eyes scanning the room as Lolo commented on the lively, glittering scene. Standing alone amidst the sea of finery, she warned her spirit companion not to be fooled by the polite smiles and the elegant music floating through the air. Beneath the surface, the nobility was a Shark Tank split into factions, the traditionalists who clung to bloodlines and the new money who worshipped power. In this world, influence was the only currency that mattered, and the weak were merely footstools for the strong. Sensing the weight of her mission, Lolo nudged her to begin, but Belle knew she needed a better vantage point to locate her target in the chaos. She slipped away into the lush palace gardens, her eyes sharp and calculating as she searched for a quiet spot to observe. Lolo grumbled that the garden was empty, accusing her of laziness, but Belle remained patient, hiding herself amongst the vibrant blooms and shadows. The spirit looked skeptical of her plan, but his doubt vanished when a sharp, hostile voice cut through the air, and Belle peered through the foliage to see a dramatic showdown between two sisters. Sasha, the elder sister, was a vision of fury and red, berating the gentle Heidi and demanding she return to the countryside where she belonged. Belle watched with bated breath, covering her mouth to suppress a gasp at the raw hostility of the encounter. Heidi tried to stand her ground, pointing out that their father would be furious if a scene were made at the palace. But the mention of her only stoked Sasha's rage as she stared at the wine on her sister's dress. Sasha snarled that Heidi was a mere country bumpkin who brought nothing to the prestigious Mountbatten name. She boasted of her status as the family's prize mage, a role that granted her near-total immunity from any consequences. With a sudden, violent motion, Sasha struck out, and the sound of a sharp slap echoed through the greenery as Heidi recoiled in shock. Sasha's head whipped around, her eyes narrowing as she demanded to know who was lurking in the shadows. Both sisters stared toward Belle's hiding spot, their faces masks of shock and suspicion. Panic flared in Belle's chest, but she managed to feign a casual air, pretending she had only been swatting at a persistent mosquito that had bitten her. Lolo flailed his tiny limbs, scolding her for losing her composure over a bug when the show was just getting started. Belle realized with a sinking heart that she had been completely spotted by the warring sisters. Sasha, her voice dripping with venom, threatened to call the guards if the intruder didn't reveal themselves immediately. Stepping out from the bushes, Belle tried to maintain a shred of dignity despite the awkwardness of being caught eavesdropping. Heidi gasped in recognition, her eyes wide. Belle offered a strained, nervous smile, greeting the sisters as if she had just happened upon them by pure chance. She waved awkwardly, her heart hammering against her ribs as she faced the tension of the scene. Sasha's gaze was like ice as she demanded to know if the two were acquainted. Heidi confirmed they were. The tension was suddenly interrupted as Lolo's system detected the hero silhouette nearby. Lolo's voice rang in her head, demanding she move forward and confess to the hero immediately, but Belle was terrified that the rival might literally kill her on the spot. Suddenly, a figure of statuesque beauty appeared, his presence commanding the very air around him as he stepped into the light. Heidi looked up in surprise as the man approached. Lolo urged Belle to move, but she raised a hand, trying to signal for a moment of silence as the hero drew closer. Syl walked toward them, his cloak billowing slightly, a godlike figure moving through the garden while Sasha watched with a stunned expression. Sasha's expression shifted instantly to a practiced, charming smile as she greeted him, asking what brought him there. The intricate details of his noble attire shimmered, marking him as a man of immense power. Before Belle could even process her next move, Syl reached out with a firm hand. He pulled Heidi toward him, his gaze intense and cold as he asked why she looked so distressed, leaving Sasha frozen in a state of shock while Belle watched the heart-fluttering scene unfold. Sasha, the red-haired viper, began weaving of lies to cover her cruelty, her expression a mask of feigned innocence. Below her, the crimson stain on the delicate gown stood out like a fresh wound against the pale green fabric. She claimed a mere accident with a maid had ruined the girl's finery, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. Heidi stood in the shadow of the lie, her heart sinking as she realized the depth of her sister's malice. Lord Syl, his violet eyes narrowing with a sharp, calculating glint, questioned the validity of such a convenient tale. He looked upon the scene with a cold detachment that made the air feel heavy and suffocating. Sasha continued her performance, her hand resting on her sister's shoulder with a false warmth that masked her true, venomous intent. She played the role of the protective elder sister to perfection, touching the ruined silk with practiced concern. Heidi, her heart feeling like a lead weight in her chest, chose to swallow her pride and remain silent to protect her father's reputation. With a forced, trembling smile that didn't reach her eyes, she assured Lord Syl it was nothing more than a small mishap. She suggested she could handle the change of clothes on her own, her voice a whisper. Lord Syl's voice was like ice as he dismissed her, his attention shifting entirely back to the scheming Sasha. He made it clear he had more important matters to discuss, his presence looming over the red-haired girl. Sasha clung to his arm with a triumphant smirk, her jewels catching the light as she secured her place by his side. Dejected and alone, Heidi bowed her head and retreated from the garden, her footsteps heavy with the weight of her sister's betrayal. Yet, as she walked away, Lord Syl's gaze lingered on her retreating figure, a strange shadow crossing his handsome face. His gloved hand clenched into a tight, frustrated fist, the sound of leather straining under his silent fury, the internal clench of his jaw out, the unspoken tension lingering in the air. Heidi wandered through the palace, the crimson wine stain on her dress looking like a bleeding heart against the pale fabric. A small, wing system creature fretted over her location, its digital voice frantic as it searched for its host. The vast empty hallways of the palace felt cavernous and cold, illuminated by the fading sun. Heidi moved through the shadows, her footsteps echoing against the marble floors. Suddenly, she froze, the sound of rhythmic footsteps behind her making her breath hitch in her throat. She stopped in her tracks, sensing a presence lurking just out of sight. She called out into the dim light, her voice wavering as she demanded to know who was stalking her through the palace. A dark silhouette loomed against the pillars, heightening her panic as she turned to face the intruder. A soft voice called out from the floral-scented air, calming her racing heart. It was Belle, her golden hair shimmering like a halo against the ornate backdrop of the hallway. Heidi breathed a sigh of relief, surprised that the noble Miss Belle would be found in such a desolate part of the castle. She questioned why the girl was sneaking around in the shadows. Heidi looked down at her ruined state, her eyes filled with a mixture of shame and confusion. Belle admitted with a sheepish grin that she had been caught red-handed, her hand brushing through her hair. Heidi's green eyes searched her face, wondering if she had come to mock the spectacle had created. Belle waved her hands frantically, her face pale with to clear her name from any malicious intent. She insisted she wasn't there to make fun of anyone. She explained that she had followed only because she was genuinely worried for her well-being, her voice softening with sincerity. Heidi realized then that Belle was a truly thoughtful person, a rarity in this cutthroat court. Touched by the unexpected kindness, Heidi clasped her hands together and beamed, her gratitude shining through her tears. That simple, honest smile caused Belle's heart to hammer against her ribs, a flutter of emotion catching her off guard. Belle stood frozen as her pulse quickened, the word thoughtful echoing in her mind. She felt a strange resonance deep within her soul. She stood among the blooming flowers of her own memories, realizing that in her past life as a manager, many had used that word to describe her facade. She remembered knitting for others and bringing tea, performing the role of the considerate worker. She recalled the exhaustion of her previous life, the constant need to please. She saw herself as a manager, always providing for others while hiding her true self. She reflected on the false mask she wore before she transmigrated into this world. She held a golden masquerade mask, a symbol of the deception she had lived. She looked back at her old self, standing in the shadow of the woman she used to be. She realized that Heidi was the first person to ever truly see through the mask to the girl beneath. She recalled the original story where Sasha would charm the court while Heidi became a pariah, a laughingstock of the noble families. The images of the past showed Heidi in her ruined dress while Sasha basked in the king's favor. Sasha had been the one to win over his majesty while Heidi was cast aside. The original timeline had doomed the heroine to a life of mockery and pain. Clenching her jaw, Belle decided she would not let anyone bully her benefactor again, her eyes burning with a newfound determination. She vowed to make sure Heidi made it to the banquet in glory. She reached out and seized Heidi's hand, her grip firm and commanding as she told her to follow. Without a word of explanation, she dragged the bewildered girl through the winding halls toward a private sanctuary. Heidi stumbled behind her, asking where they were going in such a rush. Belle's blue gown billowed behind her as she moved with a singular, fierce purpose. The grand banquet hall was a sea of glittering jewels and soft music, the height of imperial luxury. Standing on the balcony, Lord Arges surveyed the crowd with the eyes of a predator, his silver hair glowing like moonlight as he demanded to know if Belle had been found. His presence was statuesque and intimidating, his hand resting firmly on the railing. His subordinate bowed, reporting that there was no sign of the lady in the ballroom. Arges turned his sharp gaze toward the man, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He swirled his wine, his expression unreadable and cold as stone while the party continued below. When informed that Belle was staying close to Lady Arundel, his gaze sharpened with interest. He commanded his aide to keep a close watch and report back the moment she was spotted. The aide watched him with a curious, hopeful glance, wondering if the legendary ice-cold lord was finally beginning to succumb to the throes of romance. He marveled at the thought of his master finally keeping tabs on a noble lady. Back in the secluded lounge, the atmosphere was thick with a different kind of tension as Belle prepared her next move. She pressed Heidi against the wall, her golden hair cascading over her shoulders as she took control of the situation. Heidi's cheeks flushed a deep crimson, her heart racing as Belle leaned in with an intense, unwavering focus. Heidi's green eyes widened in shock, her hands clutching her chest. She asked Belle what she was doing. Belle reached for the delicate straps of the dress, her eyes filled with a daring and reckless light. Outside, the faceless of the banquet continued their revelry, oblivious to the secret exchange. Later, Belle stepped back into the light of the ballroom, only to be confronted by her mother, whose face was a mask of aristocratic horror. Her mother demanded to know where her expensive gown had gone. Belle stood there, now wearing the green, wine-stained dress that had belonged to Heidi, a scandalous sacrifice. She looked down at the ruined silk, her expression one of forced calm. She told her mother that it was just a small accident and begged her not to probe further. Her mother's frustration was palpable, her hands gesturing wildly as she lamented the loss of the specially commissioned gown. Desperate to avoid a public disaster, she covered her eyes in exasperation, noting the time was running out. She ordered Belle to flee to the carriage and change into a spare dress before the banquet truly began. Bowed her head in obedience, her eyes closed as she accepted the reprimand. Her mother watched her go, her brow furrowed in deep suspicion, wondering what game her daughter was playing. She worried that if the Marquis saw her in such a state, their reputation would be ruined. As Belle hurried through the corridors, her skirts rustling against the carpet, the system creature fluttered beside her in a panic. The creature followed her into the library, its digital voice high with anxiety. It demanded to know why she was wearing the heroine's dress, but Belle's face remained a mask of calm determination. She assured the creature that she hadn't done anything bad. The small creature puffed out its cheeks in annoyance, its little wings fluttering as it judged her actions. Belle ignored the warning, her mind racing as she asked if any important characters were about to appear. The system confirmed that the hero, the rival, and the villain were all converging in one place. Belle listened intently to the hushed whispers of the passing nobles, their voices dripping with venom. They spoke of the high and mighty Lord Arges, their words making her skin crawl. Despite the stain on her shoulder, Belle carried herself with the grace of a queen, her presence drawing eyes from every corner of the room. She wondered about the villain's name, her eyes scanning the crowd for threats. She moved through the crowd like a ghost, eavesdropping on the powerful figures who held the strings of the kingdom. The system creature hovered near her ear, questioning her motives. Belle's gaze remained sharp and focused. She insisted she was merely gathering information to ensure their survival. She listened intently as the nobles discussed the shifting loyalties of the Magic Tower and the internal strife of the Latham family. They whispered about the disappearance of Lady Emma and the fear that kept the Duke from acting. The weight of the Latham family history hung heavy over the Grand Hall, a legacy stained by the mysterious disappearance of Lady Emma 10 years prior. Duke Latham, a man of cold stone, found himself forced into a state of bitter impartiality between his sons, the villainous Arges and the favored Syl, only because the tower watched his every move with hawk-like intensity. Amidst the glittering lights and floral arrangements of the banquet, Belle found her blood beginning to boil as the poisonous hum of gossip reached her ears. Arges stood nearby, his silver hair shimmering like moonlight on frost and his eyes as sharp as a winter's edge, listening as his attendant whispered a dark suggestion to silence the offenders forever. With the icy composure of a true tyrant, Arges commanded his man to wait, unwilling to cause a scene that would offend the emperor's dignity. Yet the nobles continued their verbal assault, their laughter like jagged glass as they mocked Arges for being a pathetic wretch by his mother and unwanted by his own blood. The cruelty of their words struck a chord deep within Belle, igniting a fire of protective fury that she could not suppress. She was suddenly transported back to her own past life, remembering the suffocating weight of rumors that had once followed her when her own mother disappeared, leaving her to face a world of mocking faces alone. The memory sharpened her resolve into a weapon. She could no longer remain a silent observer. With a voice that cut through the music, she commanded the two nobles to shut their mouths immediately. They spun around in shock, their faces pale as Belle stepped forward, her golden hair practically radiating her righteous anger. She demanded to know if they were orphans raised in a cave, for only such people would dare to insult another person's mother with such shameless cruelty at a royal event. When the noblewoman dared to ask who she thought she was, Belle declared her identity with a pride that silenced the room, stating she was Belle and she simply could not stand the sight of people as vile as them. Behind her, Arges watched the scene unfold, with a gaze that flickered with a strange, new light. He was pulled back into the shadows of his childhood, remembering the days he spent huddled on the ground while other children kicked him and called him a bastard. He remembered his father's towering figure, labeling him a disappointment and declaring that he had no son like him. In those moments of crushing loneliness, he had realized that no one in the world would ever shield him from the storm and that he could only ever rely on himself. But now, this girl was standing before his enemies, demanding they apologize to him. The noble man sneered at her, mocking the fallen state of House Claren and asking if she had truly been foolish enough to fall for a man like Arges. Before Belle could retort, Arges stepped out of the shadows, his presence suffocatingly powerful as he stood behind her like a guardian deity. He informed the trembling pair that the day he was kicked out of his family would never come, his voice dropping to a dangerous, low frequency that sent the nobles scurrying away in fear. Belle watched them go, calling them cowards under her breath, but her heart nearly stopped when the villainous heir turned his intense gaze toward her. Her internal panic flared as she wondered if he was going to turn his wrath on her for interfering. Instead, Arges leaned in, his godlike features close enough to make her breath hitch, and asked if her actions meant she was in love with him. Twitched, a mix of horror and disbelief. She frantically waved her hands, swearing to the heavens that she had no feelings for him whatsoever, not even a tiny bit, as the thought of being shipped with the story's final boss felt like a literal death wish. Excusing herself with a trembling heart, she fled toward the banquet hall, leaving Adhering after her with a confusing tightness beginning to form in his chest. Her familiar, a floating creature with a mischievous streak, mocked her for her pathetic escape, but Belle insisted she simply had work to do. Inside the ballroom, the violins began a sweeping melody as the banquet officially commenced. Lord Syl, the image of a perfect gentleman, led a nervous young lady onto the floor for the first dance. He was gentle and guiding, his touch reassuring as he moved with effortless grace. The girl, wearing a dress Belle had helped her obtain, looked up at him with shimmering eyes, convinced that Belle was the kindest person she had ever met. However, not everyone was pleased as jealous rivals watched the scene with gnashing teeth, fuming that both the Duke and his son seemed captivated by this newcomer. As the dance continued, Belle's familiar warned her that she was missing her chances to secure her future. Clad in a stunning new gown and standing with a renewed sense of purpose, Belle steeled her heart, determined to make a passionate confession that would shake the very foundations of the original story. Belle felt a twinge of guilt for the heroine, knowing the tragic fate that awaited her in the original story. She recalled how Syl, the hero, only developed feelings for Heidi out of self-interest, viewing her as a mere pawn in his cold game. The grand ballroom was filled with the light of 1,000 candles as the music reached a crescendo. As the final notes of the cello faded into the air, Belle smoothed her exquisite gown, her heart racing with the weight of her mission. Her small companion fluttered beside her as she steeled her resolve, knowing she had to change the course of destiny. Suddenly, The herald's voice boomed through the hall, announcing that His Majesty had arrived. A hush fell over the crowd as the nobility parted to make way for the sovereign. The Emperor Liam Hoskin entered with a presence that was as cold as ice, his gaze sweeping over the room with godlike indifference. Every detail of the courtly finery seemed to shimmer under his intimidating aura. The music resumed, weaving a tapestry of sound through the opulent space. Among the guests, Catherine, the Emperor's mistress, stood like a statuesque beauty in her crimson silks. Beside her, the Emperor looked every bit the tyrant, his smile never reaching his eyes as he accepted the adulation of his subjects. The crowd erupted in cheers, raising their glasses to the son of the Empire. Belle felt a surge of panic, her mind swirling with the desperate need to present her offering before her stepmother could seize control. She knew that if she didn't act now, she would remain a victim of the plot that surrounded her. Nearby, Syl approached Heidi, his voice smooth as he complimented her dancing. He informed her that he had urgent business to attend to, leaving her alone amidst the sea of nobles. He warned her to use her father's name as a shield against any who dared to offend her, his tone protective yet calculating. Heidi was left stunned, her green eyes wide with a mixture of hope and confusion. In the shadows of her memory, Heidi recalled a moonlit night where the walls had ears. She had overheard her mother whispering a treacherous secret that chilled her to the bone. Her mother had revealed a plot to use Syl's marriage to Heidi as a stepping stone for her father to seize the throne. The weight of the betrayal was suffocating, leaving Heidi trembling as she realized she was being used as a weapon against the man she loved. She looked at Syl, her heart breaking as she struggled between her duty to her family and her burgeoning feelings. She closed her eyes and prayed for a friend, anyone she could trust in this nest of vipers. At that moment, Belle appeared like a shimmering vision, stepping into their path. With a bright, almost manic smile, Belle called out to the hero. Syl turned, his statuesque features tightening in confusion at the unexpected interruption. Belle clasped her hands together, begging for just a moment of his time. He recognized her as the girl from the village, his memories of her simple beauty clashing with her current noble appearance. He looked at her, his gaze sharp and inquisitive. Without a shred of shame, Belle shouted her confession for the entire room to hear, declaring her love for him. Syl stood frozen, completely dazed by the sudden and public outburst. Heidi gasped, her heart pounding against her ribs as she witnessed the shocking scene. Belle didn't stop there, boldly asking the hero to marry her in front of the entire court. A wave of scandalous gossip swept through the ballroom as the guests whispered behind their fans. Syl stared at her, wondering if she had lost her mind or if this was some elaborate trick. Heidi watched them, her mind reeling from the sheer audacity of Belle's proposal. Belle leaned in, her eyes burning with a false intensity as she asked once more to be his wife. Syl's mind drifted to his own painful past, the shadow of his illegitimate birth always looming over him. He remembered his mother's gentle face and the stigma that had followed him since he was a babe. He recalled the cold union of his parents, a relationship built on anything but love. As a child, he had been the target of cruel fingers and sharp tongues, nobles ridiculing his very existence. The pain of those memories flickered in his violet eyes for a fleeting second. He believed that most women only saw his status, hesitating to associate with him because of his tainted bloodline. He looked down at Belle, assuming her lack of etiquette was a sign of her family's ruin and her own desperation. In his heart, he compared her to the innocent Heidi, finding Belle's behavior loud and unrefined. His voice dropped an octave, cold and final as he spoke. He looked her straight in the eye and told her that he could never marry her. Belle accepted the rejection with a serene smile, though internally she mocked him, calling him a wannabe Chad. When he questioned the meaning of her words, she simply lied, claiming it was a high compliment for a man of his confidence. Syl remained suspicious, feeling the sting of an insult he couldn't quite prove as she looked at him with hidden malice. The party continued around them, the atmosphere lively and oblivious to the drama unfolding. From the shadows, a servant rushed to inform the stepmother that Belle was making a scene with the Latham heir. The woman's face contorted with rage, her eyes flashing with a murderous light as she realized her plans were being jeopardized. Whispers snake through the opulent ballroom as the nobility wonders when the fragile Belle Claren began her secret dalliance with Syl Lam. Her heart was supposed to belong to the terrifying Arges. She had dared to walk the tightrope between two powerful men, a feat that seemed impossible for a mere extra. Deep within, Belle calculates her every move, knowing that her role as a background character in this world is her only shield while the sim calculates her mission rewards. She smiles with a feigned innocence, convinced that surviving as an extra should be a simple task if she just follows the script. However, the calm is shattered when the news reaches Lord Arges. A glass crumbles into shards in his powerful grip as he hears that Belle has proposed to his brother. His face is a mask of cold fury, unable to fathom why the woman he watches would choose his archenemy over him. His red eyes burn with a predatory jealousy, his pride wounded by the thought that she considers him inferior to the scheming Sil. He stares with a lethal intensity that could freeze the very air in the room, his possessiveness flaring like an untamed fire. The thought of her falling in love at first sight with anyone else is a direct insult to his godlike authority and his claim over her. From the shadows of the pillars, the Mountbatten sisters watch the drama unfold with venomous curiosity. Sasha's gaze is a sharp blade as she identifies the young lady of the Claren family standing in the center of the storm. They whisper maliciously about Belle's failing family economy and her desperate attempts to latch onto the Latham name for survival. Sasha's lips curl into a sneer, dismissing Belle as a mere daydreamer who doesn't know her place in the social hierarchy. A messenger soon approaches, informing Belle that the formidable Sasha requests her presence immediately. Belle's heart hammers against her ribs like a trapped bird, as she realizes the female supporting character has finally set her sights on her. Heidi looks on with deep apprehension, knowing her sister's infatuation with Sil will lead to Belle's certain ruin. Belle maintains her cheerful facade, urging Heidi to focus on her own romance and not let this first confession go to waste on a mere extra like herself. She remembers the original plot, where Sil is a master manipulator, users as mere tools to divert Arges's attention while hiding his true love. Sensing the impending danger, Belle tries to decline the meeting, claiming she is far too busy with her own affairs to be bothered. She is determined to follow the plot and complete her missions without being dragged into the heroine's complex drama. Her mind is already racing toward her goal of securing a title from the Emperor through her secret sugar trade. But Sasha will not be denied. She appears with a smile that is as sharp and cold as a guillotine. Belle's breath hitches as the villainess looms over her, the atmosphere in the hallway turning suffocating. She prays for an escape from this web of malice, her mind screaming for a way out. Sasha offers her help with a fake sweetness that belies her true intention to humiliate and discard Belle. She is determined to prove that Belle is nothing more than a pretty, empty face that Sil would never spare a second glance for. Belle quickly pivots, seizing Sasha's hands and weaving a tragic tale of an impending arranged marriage. She fakes a sob behind her handkerchief, suggesting that Sasha should take her place to meet the suitor and free her from the burden. Sasha's eyes light up with a calculating greed, realizing that if Belle is married off, Sil will finally be hers alone. Belle inwardly sighs with relief, hoping this distraction will ruffle Sasha's feathers and keep her away from the main plot. But the air suddenly turns heavy as Arges appears, his footsteps echoing like a death knell against the marble floor. He declares himself Belle's matchmaking partner, his presence towering and intimidating as he looks down at her with a gaze that demands total submission. Without a word, he seizes her arm to drag her away from the prying eyes of the court, his grip like iron. Suddenly, Sil intervenes, his hand clamping down on Belle's other wrist in a display of blatant defiance against his brother. Belle is caught in a suffocating tug-of-war between the two powerful giants, her heart pounding in terror. Sil challenges his brother with a mocking smirk, asking why he is taking his date away so forcefully. Belle begs to be let go, her internal panic reaching a fever pitch as the brothers' auras clash. Arges's gaze drops to her with a look of pure betrayal, his voice low and dangerous as he asks if she is truly rejecting him for his brother. Sil pulls her closer to his side, declaring her his date for the evening and refusing to let Arges take another step. Arges' expression is one of terrifying stillness as he speaks her name, a warning that chills her to the bone. He demands to know if she is certain about staying with his brother instead of following him. Terrified of the villain's wrath, Belle stammers out that she likes Lord Sil and will not go with Arges. Arges's eyes narrow, his jealousy boiling over as he demands to know what she could possibly see in a man as deceitful as Sil. Sil leans in, his voice dripping with honeyed malice as he asks her to tell his brother exactly what she loves about him. Belle looks at her system in absolute despair, feeling as though she has stepped into a death trap from which there is no escape. Sasha watches the scene with a face contorted in pure, unadulterated rage that Belle has somehow captured the attention of both Latham heirs. Arges looked down at Belle Claren, his voice a low, dangerous rumble as he questioned if she was truly the type to gossip about such matters. His crimson eyes, cold as frozen blood, searched her face for a trace of the woman he once thought was different from the rest. The shadows of his past loomed large, a bitter memory of the day his life was shattered by the arrival of another woman and her child. He recalled the sting of neglect, watching his father shower affection on Sil while he, the rightful heir, was left to sharpen his blade in the cold. All those years of striving for perfection meant nothing when the world only had eyes for his brother. Belle watched the villain's knuckles whiten, sensing the storm brewing within him as she whispered her concerns to her small companion. The tension snapped when Syl appeared, his presence radiant and suffocating as he commanded Arges to cease his pursuit of a lady who clearly had no interest in him. Belle's heart hammered against her ribs. She knew Syl was merely playing the part of the hero, adding fuel to a fire that threatened to consume them all. In the original story, Syl was a master of manipulation, using women as shields to protect his true love, while Arges, the so-called villain, was at least honest in his disdain. Arges's gaze darkened, his voice dropping an octave as he asked if Syl truly intended to provoke him. With a mocking smile, Syl claimed he only wanted his brother to face the reality of his unwanted advances. Arges turned back to Belle one last time, his eyes betraying a flicker of genuine concern for the danger she was walking into, though he cursed himself for even caring. Suddenly, a sharp voice pierced the air, and Belle felt a surge of relief as her stepmother appeared at the top of the grand staircase. The woman descended with an imposing grace, her dark gown trailing like a shadow. She pulled Belle away, warning her with a chilling intensity to stay far from the Latham brothers if she valued her life. She spoke of a mother's love, though her eyes were devoid of warmth. Belle lowered her head, offering a submissive smile to hide her inner turmoil. She was grateful for the interruption, but the reprieve was short-lived. Her stepmother's hands gripped hers with a desperate strength as she revealed her true plan. Belle was to marry Marquise Arundel and ascend to the throne as crown princess. This was no mere matchmaking, it was a calculated move on a dangerous chessboard. Soon, found herself standing before the youthful jockey Arundel and his mother, the Emperor's infamous mistress. The boy greeted her with a practiced elegance, his words dripping with sweet, hollow praise for her beauty. Belle realized with jolt that they expected her to be a simple-minded doll, a beauty without brains to get in their way. She shared a knowing glance with her spirit companion, piecing together Lady Arundel's treacherous scheme. The mistress was losing her hold on the Emperor, a man whose weakness for beauty was legendary, and whose empress had blocked every other woman's path to power. Lady Arundel was one of many who had been cast aside in the shadows of the palace. As her own beauty began to fade, she had turned to hunting for fresh, beautiful pawns to offer the Emperor, using her own son as bait to secure her position. Belle decided to play the part of the vapid socialite, allowing Jockey to lead her away under his mother's watchful eye. As they walked through the sun-drenched gardens, Jockey attempted to charm her. Asking what her heart truly desired, Belle let out a shallow laugh, declaring that only gold and the hustle of making money could ever satisfy her. Jockey's smile didn't falter, but his internal thoughts were laced with contempt for a woman he deemed all looks and no class. When he mentioned his passion for art, Belle's mind raced. She knew from the original story that he was a devoted fan of the dancer Sasha. He secretly hoarded her paintings as a silent, obsessive tribute. Seeing an opportunity, Belle feigned interest when he invited her to his father's private study. She followed him through the ornate halls, acting the part of the hesitant lady while her heart raced with the thrill of the gamble. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy with power. The Emperor sat across from Arges, praising the military victories of the Latham family. Arges bowed his head, his loyalty a cold, sharp weapon in his hand. The Emperor smiled, a predator behind a mask of regal kindness. Their game was interrupted as Jockey was announced. The Emperor commanded them to enter, his gaze landing on the unexpected guest. Belle and Jockey paid their respects, the air between them thick with unspoken tension. Arges's eyes widened in silent fury as he saw Belle again, wondering how many men she intended to ensnare in a single day. The Emperor leaned forward, his curiosity piqued as he asked for the lady's name. Belle curtsied with flawless grace, introducing herself as Belle Claren. A flicker of recognition crossed the Emperor's face. He asked if she was the daughter of the woman he once knew, the purple-haired beauty who had haunted his youth. He remarked that Belle was her mother's spitting image. In a voice tinged with nostalgia and regret, he confessed that he had once been one of her mother's most ardent admirers. He offered his condolences for the passing of her father, his former rival in love. Belle's blood ran cold as she realized the depth of the history she had stumbled into. Jockey watched with a predatory satisfaction, believing his mother's plan to offer Belle as a mistress was falling perfectly into place. He was confident that the Emperor would be unable to resist the daughter of the woman who had once taken the Empire by storm. But from the shadows, Arges watched her with a suffocating intensity, his heart heavy with the knowledge that if the Emperor claimed her, Belle's life would be forfeit. The tension in the opulent hall was thick enough to suffocate as Belle stood before the Emperor's throne, flanked by the oily presence of Jockey. Jockey's voice was smooth as silk as he explained that their presence was merely the result of a matchmaking meeting arranged by his mother, a calculated attempt to pay their respects to the crown. He looked toward the Emperor with a forced smile, asking for his imperial judgment on the young woman standing beside him. The Emperor's eyes, cold and calculating, fixed on Belle with an intensity that sent shivers down her spine as he noted her striking resemblance to her mother, Mia. Deep within his dark heart, the Emperor how Mia had once rejected his love to marry another. leading him to spitefully drive her family into the depths of poverty until her dying breath. Now, looking at the daughter who inherited that same haunting beauty, a predatory thought took root in his mind. If he could not possess the mother, the daughter would serve as a fitting replacement, and he reached out to shield her eyes in a gesture of chilling possession. Belle felt a wave of pure unease over her, her instincts screaming that she was walking into a trap. The Emperor's invitation for her to remain in the royal capital was a gilded cage, a move designed to ensure she could never escape his reach. Belle forced a mask of compliance, realizing that securing her title was the only path to a future where no one could dictate her marriage. From the periphery, Arges watched the exchange with a statuesque stillness, his silver catching the light as he silently cursed her for being a foolish woman who walked blindly into the lion's den. Sensing the walls closing in, Belle announced she had brought a special gift, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. She began to rummage through her skirts with a frantic determination. Arges remained skeptical, knowing her stepmother had already stripped her of the precious honey she intended to use as leverage. Finally, her fingers closed around a small, ornate pouch. The Emperor looked down at the offering with blatant confusion, questioning if it was merely food, only for Belle to reveal it was something far more valuable. Sugar. She maintained a poise that belied her internal panic, assuring the suspicious monarch that the sparkling granules were a common, harmless seasoning. With a look of profound doubt, the Emperor took a small taste. The sweetness exploded across his palate, leaving him momentarily stunned. A collective gasp echoed through the room as the shock of the discovery hit the onlookers. Delighted by the sensation, the Emperor commanded Arges to try the substance himself. He laughed aloud, marveling at how this simple sugar possessed a flavor that rivaled the rarest honey. Arges's expression shifted from disdain to absolute shock. In a world where honey was a sacred commodity controlled by the clergy and the trade associations, this girl had just produced a miracle. He realized with a jolt of adrenaline that a honey substitute would be a fatal blow to the Empire's economy, and his gaze toward Belle sharpened with newfound respect and wariness. The Emperor's greed flared as he demanded to know where such a treasure was found. Belle met his gaze with unyielding eyes, declaring that she had not found the sugar, but had manufactured it herself. The revelation struck the room like a physical blow, leaving Jockey in a state of trembling disbelief, as he realized the woman he thought was a mindless puppet was actually a master of her own fate. The Emperor, now fully enticed, confirmed her expertise. He offered her any reward she desired, his mind already drifting toward the dark possibility of making her his mistress. But Belle's request was clear and sharp. She demanded the title of Countess. Jockey's face contorted in horror at the thought of losing his leverage, while Arges remained a silent observer of the high-stakes gamble. The Emperor countered, offering a wealthy territory and an early inheritance in exchange for the secret formula. Arges watched the scene unfold with bated breath. To the astonishment of everyone present, Belle declined the Emperor's generous offer. The Emperor's voice dropped an octave, warning her that possessing such a dangerous secret alone would make her a target for every noble in the land. Belle knew the danger better than anyone, understanding the economic chaos her formula would bring to the honey market. She proposed a brilliant compromise. She would keep the heirloom formula but establish a merchant guild, offering the Emperor half of all future profits in exchange for his imperial backing. The Emperor realized he was cornered. He could not seize the formula by force without appearing as a bully to his vassals, and the profit sharing was too tempting to ignore. The deal was sealed, and Belle felt a surge of triumph as she was ordered to stay in the city to finalize the documents. As they finally exited the suffocating atmosphere of the throne room, Arges's cold facade broke into a scowl as he scolded her for her reckless bravery, reminding her that one wrong word could have sent her head to the chopping block. Tried to call out to him, but as the adrenaline finally ebbed away, her legs began to tremble violently. She collapsed forward, her strength vanishing as she admitted her legs had turned to jelly from the sheer terror of the negotiation. Meanwhile, far from the palace, a vase shattered against a wall as Belle's stepmother erupted in a murderous rage, screaming at Jockey for failing to turn Belle into a mistress. Jockey could only stammer in defense, explaining that Belle's bold gift had changed everything to abandon their initial plot. The mother's fury simmered into a cold, poisonous resolve as she warned that they must prepare for the worst. Jockey, desperate to regain favor, pledged to do whatever was necessary. His mother's eyes gleamed with a new, wicked scheme as she praised his sensibility. She commanded him to seduce Belle and marry her at any cost, for only through marriage could they steal the sugar formula and reclaim their power. Back in the palace corridors, the light of the chandeliers danced off Arges's stoic face as he unceremoniously lifted the trembling Belle. His presence was suffocatingly masculine and cold as he ignored her pleas to be put down. He hoisted her over his shoulder like a common sack, a display of brute strength that left Belle red-faced and indignant. When he finally set her back on her feet, she clutched her stomach, leaning against the wall as she complained that his rough handling nearly made her sick. Arges merely adjusted his sleeves, his voice dropping to a low, haughty tone as he told her she should be grateful for his rare assistance. Belle looked up at the handsome villain with pure outrage, questioning his twisted definition of help. Their bickering was cut short by the sudden, icy arrival of her stepmother. The older woman's eyes burned with jealousy as she saw Belle standing so close to the powerful Duke Latham. She moved with a predatory stride, demanding to know why Belle was cozying up to the Duke instead of remaining with Jockey. She tried to force Belle back into her shadow, suggesting she stay in the city to develop her relationship with the Marquise. Arges stood behind Belle, his gaze as cold as a winter storm. With a smirk that didn't reach her eyes, Belle informed her stepmother that the Emperor had all granted her the title, and she would be staying in the capital alone to wait for her documents. The stepmother's face paled into a mask of pure shock, her mind racing to understand how the honey she had confiscated hadn't stopped this ascent. She looked toward Arges, convinced that he must have been the hidden hand behind Belle's success. Arges looked down at the fuming woman, his voice of any warmth as he delivered the final blow. He had considered helping, but Belle hadn't needed his assistance at all. Belle pushed away the ghost of her past, her voice cold as she told her mother to stop guessing and worry about her own crumbling situation. The woman's eyes flared with a desperate, murderous rage as Belle reminded her of the luxury she had enjoyed after being a destitute commoner, only to repay that kindness with betrayal and an affair with the butler. With a firm grip on the dark fabric of a protective presence, Belle turned her back on the woman's pathetic pleas. Beside her stood Lorgus, his silver hair shimmering like moonlight and his gaze as sharp as a blade, commanding they proceed to the ceremony without wasting another breath. The woman collapsed onto the plush red carpet, her cries echoing through the hall, but Arges leaned in and whispered for Belle to remain steadfast and never look back. His presence was suffocating, yet strangely grounding as he looked down at her with eyes that seemed to pierce through her very soul. He watched her with a growing, dangerous curiosity, wondering where this delicate greenhouse flower had found such sudden, iron-willed resilience. He warned her that once her secret formulas were revealed, the nobility would swarm her like starving wolves, suggesting that she find a reliable husband to shield her territory. Belle merely tilted her head back, her laughter like falling glass, as she questioned if such men were as common as weeds, declaring her intent to rely on no one but herself. Suddenly, the rhythmic sound of their footsteps ceased. In the heavy silence of the corridor, Arges's voice dropped to a low, heart-stopping register as he asked her to consider marrying him instead. He stood before her, a godlike figure of power and cold ambition, extending a hand that promised both protection and a pact with the devil. Belle's heart hammered against her ribs, her breath catching as the world seemed to tilt on its axis. She searched his face for any sign of a cruel prank, asking if he could possibly be joking. He stepped closer, his polished boot clicking against the floor with predatory grace. Looking down at her with an intensity that made her skin prickle, he asked if he looked like a man who played such games, leaving her stammering in the wake of his overwhelming aura. She tried to retreat, reminding him that she was no saint, and could never fulfill the role of the woman he was supposed to desire. Yet he remained unmoved, declaring that his ambitions were his own to achieve and required no woman's help, though he demanded an answer by the time of the royal hunt. His eyes lidded slightly, a flash of something dark and possessive crossing his features as he gave her a deadline for her decision. Belle watched him walk away, her mind a whirlwind of confusion as she questioned why a man so devoted to power would suddenly propose to a mere bystander in the grand design of fate. He simply confessed that she was the first woman who did not fill him with disgust, and that he found himself consumed by a need to understand the enigma she had become. The following morning, the weight of the proposal left Belle sprawled across her silken sheets, her eyes shadowed by a sleepless night of panic. Felt like a disheveled mess, but the palace was already in motion as maids arrived with a parade of shimmering silks and jewels that sparkled like captured stars. As she draped herself in the opulence of the elite, she understood why so many women sold their souls for a taste of this life. When she finally emerged, her teal gown to her curves and her golden hair cascading like a waterfall, the maids could only gasp in adoration at her unparalleled beauty. She offered a faint, calculated smile, knowing her appearance was her greatest weapon. However, the peace was shattered when her eyes widened at the sight of a new player on the board. The villain had arrived, and Belle's blood ran cold as she felt the familiar pull of a plot she was trying to escape. Marquise Arundel and Lord Latham stood like twin pillars of nobility, their presence drawing every eye in the room. Latham announced he had been assigned to oversee her every move in the capital, while Arundel presented an invitation to the royal hunt with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Panic flared in her chest as she realized she couldn't even ride a horse, only for a shimmering system doe to appear, forcing her into a mission that demanded she play the villain during the hunt. Arundel offered to be her teacher with a courtly bow, but Latham immediately countered, his voice dripping with icy jealousy as he claimed his horsemanship was far superior. The tension between the two men was electric as they moved to the riding grounds. Both stood with hands outstretched, a silent war of pride and possessiveness raging between them as they waited for her to choose. Belle felt like a trapped bird between two predators, her heart racing as she looked from one hand to the other. In that moment, she remembered her past life, and the vow she made to never let anyone dictate her happiness again. She looked at the two powerful men and knew her path. With a defiant spark in her eyes, she chose neither, refusing to be a pawn in their game. Instead, she challenged them to a race, declaring that only the winner would have the honor of teaching her. Both men froze, utterly stunned by her audacity. Waving them off with a playful, heart-fluttering grace, she retreated to the rest area to enjoy the spoils of the palace. Arundel's eyes narrowed with newfound interest as he accepted the challenge. Latham's jaw tightened, his gaze following her as he vowed not to let her fall into another's hands. While the men risked their lives on the track, Belle indulged in a mountain of exquisite desserts. When a maid offered wine, Belle's internal calculator whirred as she shamelessly asked if the treats were free. The maid smiled politely while secretly judging her as a cheap social climber. Nearby, the nobility whispered in scandalized tones about the woman who had dared to make two high-ranking lords compete for her favor. A man with lavender hair watched her from the shadows, his eyes burning with a mixture of resentment and lingering attraction as he recalled her past confessions of love. Sensing an opportunity, a blonde noble approached her, confident that a superficial woman like her would be easy to seduce. He loomed over her while she was mid-bite, his presence an unwelcome intrusion. From a distance, the lavender-haired lord watched with a sneer, expecting her to flirt as she always did. The noble offered to teach her riding himself, his voice oily with false charm. Belle looked at him with a gaze as cold as a winter frost, pointing out that two far more important men were already racing for that privilege and asking if he intended to join them. Insulted, the man boasted of his father's title, trying to intimidate her with his lineage. Belle didn't blink, her eyes flashing with a terrifying regal authority as she asked him what his own title was. The man's face paled and he began to sweat, stammering that he had yet to inherit anything, completely silenced by the sheer weight of her presence. Standing amidst a cascade of roses, Belle Clarin held herself with a grace that belied the storm within her as she demanded to be treated with the respect her noble title deserved. The man before her remained unimpressed, his gaze tracing the lines of her face with a sneer as she threatened him with the cold reality of an imperial prison for his blatant disrespect. Before she could draw another breath, he lunged forward, his fingers curling roughly into the delicate lace of her collar as he accused her of weaving a web of lies. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird, but she met his fury with a gaze of steel, issuing a final, chilling warning to release her or suffer the consequences. Suddenly, a hand as strong as iron clamped onto the aggressor's wrist, the sheer force of the grip causing the man to gasp in sudden agony. Lord Syl appeared like a statuesque protector, his violet eyes flashing with a dangerous light as he effortlessly brought the interloper to his knees. With a dismissive glance at the trembling man, Syl checked on Belle, his voice low and laced with a possessive undertone as he ordered the nuisance to vanish and never dare touch what belonged to him again. The man scrambled away in terror, leaving Belle alone with the hero whose very presence felt like a suffocating weight. She offered her gratitude with a practiced smile, yet Syl's eyes remained frigid, mocking her for the way she seemingly held every man in the capital under a scandalous spell. He leaned in, his handsome features like a mask of carved marble, accusing her of being a master player who used men as pawns. Belle's internal panic flared, her mind racing to main her facade as she insisted that the swarming bees were hardly the fault of the flower. He scoffed at her innocence, his disbelief as sharp as a blade while he stood there in his regal, gold-trimmed attire. As her internal system screamed at her to stay in character, she doubled down on her hero-obsessed act, fluttering her lashes and claiming he was the only one for her. Syl's suspicion only deepened as he questioned if she was a spy sent by Arges, his proximity so intense it made her breath hitch. He eventually turned away with a cold dismissal, declaring she wasn't his type and leaving her to fume in silence. She desperately wanted to strike him for his arrogance, but the systems warned her to her role as the devoted fan. Just as she thought she was safe, Syl whirled back, seizing her waist and hand in a sudden, breathless embrace that sent a jolt of electricity through her. He whispered a dark warning against playing both sides, his breath hot against her skin before he finally released his hold. The relief was short-lived as her system shrieked a warning to look behind her, where a shadow more terrifying than Syl had manifested. It was Arges, the silver-haired villain of this world, looking down at her with eyes like glowing embers. Her blood ran cold as she realized the final boss had been watching them for far too long, presence radiating a murderous pressure. She tried to offer a sunny greeting about his recent race, her voice trembling as she prayed he hadn't seen through her. Syl stepped in with a mocking smirk, claiming he was merely assisting a fan, which only seemed to darken Arges's already lethal expression. The villain's gaze was suffocating, his silence more terrifying than any threat as he stared at the hand Syl had placed on her shoulder. After Syl departed, the air grew thick with tension as Arges questioned her desperation for his brother, his voice dropping to a dangerous rumble. He reached out, his hand cupping her jaw with a terrifying tenderness that made her heart stop. His confession was a thunderclap. He claimed his gaze had never lingered on a woman until her, and now he was consumed by a spell he couldn't break. He pulled her into a crushing embrace, his eyes burning with an obsessive fire as he demanded she marry him and look at no other man. Belle's mind fractured at the sight of the villain's sudden, desperate proposal, his face buried in her neck as he begged her to stay with him forever. She stammered about etiquette, her hands trembling against his chest as she tried to push back against his overwhelming intensity. Arges was relentless, mocking her double standards and promising her his entire world if only she would be his. Internally, Belle's soul wailed in terror, knowing that marrying the villain would lead to a tragic end for them both. With her system support failing, she felt cornered like a frightened bird. In a moment of sheer desperation, she activated a plot revision token, her fingers dancing across a digital interface that only she could see. She chose to rewrite the proposal, watching the progress bar climb as the world around her blurred into data streams. The modification was a success, and as the light faded, she saw the confusion wash over Arges's face as his memories of the proposal were wiped clean. He blinked, his mind a blank slate as he tried to recall why they were standing so close in the library. Belle didn't miss a beat, immediately reverting to her worshipful fan persona and praising his victory in the race. Arges, now restored to his cold but stable self, promised to make her the brightest star at the upcoming hunting tournament. She felt a wave of dizzying relief as he finally left, his obsession temporarily diverted by her clever manipulation. He looked back one last time, his silver hair catching the light as he reaffirmed his commitment to her status. Belle's smile was wide and false, a mask of joy hiding her exhaustion. She relished the fact that he was no longer proposing, even if the plot was spiraling into unknown territory. Her joy was short-lived, however, as she realized she had traded one problem for another. As she walked through the sun-drenched gardens, the man from before followed her like a devoted puppy, his eyes filled with a sickening adoration. She felt the weight of her many suitors like a noose, her heart heavy with the realization that her beauty had become a curse. She begged them all to stay away, her spirit crumbling as she worried that the sheer number of obsessive men in her life would be the very thing that shortened her lifespan. And then the blonde marquis, a man who possessed a title but lacked the power to command even a single acre of land, confessed his humble status with a self-deprecating smile. Belle watched him, her mind racing with the knowledge of his tragic destiny as a king's illegitimate child who would eventually die a lonely death upon a stolen throne. Despite his current lack of influence, he lamented his station while she focused on her own precarious survival in this world. Suddenly, the peace of the street was shattered as a reckless carriage barreled toward them, the driver's shouts cutting through the air like a blade. Without a second thought, Belle lunged forward, her fingers gripping his sleeve as she pulled the stunned nobleman from the path of thundering hooves. The heavy wheels clattered past, leaving behind a cloud of dust and a lingering sense of danger. Breathless and trembling, she looked up to find the Marquis staring at her with wide, disbelieving eyes, overwhelmed by the fact that she had risked her life to protect him. Gratitude burned in his gaze as he took her hands in his voice thick with emotion as he offered himself in marriage as the only way to repay such a debt. The sudden intensity sent a jolt of alarm through her, and she firmly rejected his proposal, declaring that her future husband would have to cast aside his own name to take hers. The sheer audacity of her demand left him reeling, for no woman in the Empire would dare suggest such a thing to a man of his rank. Seeking to change the subject, she turned her attention to the magnificent temple looming before them, a structure of white stone and divine grace. He explained that this was the heart of the church, a place far grander than any village chapel. As they entered, Belle recalled the legends of the mysterious pope and the flower goddess Flora, whose power was said to be the key to ruling the entire continent. They walked through the hallowed halls, the air thick with the scent of incense and the weight of ancient secrets. Her sharp eyes immediately caught sight of the same reckless carriage from earlier, parked ominously at the temple entrance. Ignoring her unease, the Marquis spoke of the flower goddess and the holy children who were sent as messengers to protect the world. It was said that any nation blessed with such a child could command the fate of the land, a piece of lore that had not been mentioned in the original story she knew. All around them, commoners and nobles alike were deep in prayer, their faces etched with the desperate hope that the goddess would grant their most fervent wishes. The Marquis stood tall, his elegant attire catching the light as they moved deeper into the sanctuary. Belle looked at him, questioning whether he truly believed in the reliability of distant gods after all she had endured. With a touch of playful defiance, she clasped her hands and prayed for a blessing of never-ending wealth, causing the Marquise to sputter in shock at her vulgarity. When she took it a step further and asked for the dead to be raised, he frantically told her that even gods had their limits. She smirked, pointing out the irony of their supposed omnipotence while he watched her with growing concern. He quickly shushed her, his hand moving to quiet her lips as he warned her that such blasphemy could invite the wrath of the church. High above them on a balcony, a shadowed figure watched their interaction with keen interest. It was His Holiness himself, his eyes gleaming behind an ornate mask as he remarked on the rarity of a woman brave enough to question divine power. Entranced by her spirit, he commanded his subordinate to uncover her identity. Interest in her clearly piqued. As the sun began to set over the temple's towers, the time for their departure drew near. The Marquise regretfully informed her that the king had summoned him, ending their time together for the day. Belle offered him a bright, relieved smile, hiding her joy at finally being free of his suffocating attention. Before leaving, he took her hand and pressed a lingering kiss to her knuckles, vowing to win the sacred medal for her at the upcoming hunting tournament. He promised to make her the most dazzling lady in the empire, his eyes shining with a romantic fervor. Legend spoke of a nobleman who once gave his medal to his beloved, sealing their eternal happiness. Every noble lady dreamed of meeting her soulmate during the hunt, a tradition deeply rooted in the empire's romantic lore. To Belle, however, it all seemed like cheesy nonsense, though she knew the hero would use the medal to win the heroine's heart. Her role as an NPC was simply to cause drama and make the hero's journey more difficult, a task she accepted with a weary sigh. The next morning, the sun bathed the royal palace in a golden glow as the staff prepared for the day. Belle sat before a lavish breakfast spread, the table overflowing with her favorite delicacies. She felt a thrill of satisfaction at being addressed as Countess, a title that represented the power she was beginning to wield. She relished the taste of her new status, though her enjoyment was dampened by the presence of the man she considered the final boss. Lord Arges sat across from her, his cold, statuesque beauty intimidating as he watched her eat with a critical eye. Trying to be polite, she asked if he would join her, silently praying that he would refuse and leave her in peace. To her utter horror, he agreed with a simple word, his easy compliance leaving her heart pounding in a mixture of shock and dread. The scrape of a chair echoed through the lavish dining hall as Belle Claren settled into her seat. Across the vast expanse of a table groaning under the weight of countless delicacies sat Lord Arges, his presence as cold and imposing as a statue of ice. He watched her with those piercing, ruby-red eyes, questioning if the feast he had prepared failed to suit her refined tastes. Belle felt a bead of nervous sweat prickle her skin as she quickly assured him the food was wonderful, though his proximity in such a large room felt suffocating. Deep down, her mind was a whirlwind of schemes. After the bridge with her stepmother had been burned, she desperately needed to purge her mansion of traitors and find loyal souls to serve her. Summoning her courage, she asked the intimidating Duke to escort her to the capital's notorious slave market that very day. When he hesitated, warning her of the filth and danger, she leaned in with a calculated, sugary sweetness, fluttering her lashes and insisting that she be perfectly safe by his side. Arges was not so easily swayed, his voice dripping with disdain as he asked if she truly thought such transparent sweet talk would work on a man like him. Belle's playful facade crumbled into a pout of genuine frustration, cursing the fact that this cold-blooded villain seemed immune to feminine charms. As Arges elegantly wiped his mouth, his gaze softened just a fraction, a hidden current of amusement beneath his icy exterior. He finally relented, though his command was absolute. She was to stay glued to his side and never stray. Soon, they arrived at the grim, sunged plaza of the slave market, a place where human lives were bartered like common grain. As they walked through the desperate crowd, Belle felt the weight of 1,000 hopeless gazes, the air thick with the smell of misery and the sounds of men and women begging to be chosen. The sheer brutality of the scene made her heart sink, the reality of this world far more jagged than any storybook. Arges leaned down, his voice a rumble, asking if the noble lady was finally beginning to feel the prickle of fear. She looked up at him, hers bright with a defiance that surprised him, stating that nothing could be scarier than the man already standing beside her. A silent challenge passed between them before Arges stepped out, his large, warm hand enveloping hers in a grip that was both a protection and a tether. Their progress was suddenly halted by the sickening sound of a whip lashing through the air. A cruel noble was mercilessly beating two slaves, the sharp crack of leather followed by the muffled groans of pain. The noble laughed, a sound like glass breaking, his face twisted in a mask of sadistic glee. Around them, the commoners whispered in hushed, fearful tones about the cruelty of the highborn. Belle's breath hitched as she pushed through the onlookers, her eyes widening at the sight of the blood-stained earth. The horror of the scene clawed at her throat, her stomach churning as she witnessed the unbridled malice of her own class. The whip, dark with fresh blood, coiled like a snake in the noble's hand as he prepared for another strike. Arges remained detached, explaining with a chilling calmness that the laws of the empire were designed to shield the nobility, allowing them to kill kill commoners with total impunity. Belle's blood boiled at his words, her heart screaming against the injustice of a system that treated lives like disposable toys. Another crack of the whip echoed through the square. On the ground, one brother huddled over the other, trying to shield him from the relentless blows with his own broken body. The older brother whispered a choked apology for failing to protect his sibling, his eyes clouded with agony. The younger boy could only weep, his hands trembling as he clutched at his brother's tattered cloak. The noble, bored with display, sneered and ordered his men to chop off their limbs and leave them for the wolves. Belle could no longer restrain herself. She tore her hand from Arges's grip and screamed for the madness to stop. She stepped forward, her silhouette a beacon of defiance against the oppressive heat of the market. Arges froze, his hand still outstretched, his eyes narrowing as he watched her throw herself into the path of danger. The cruel noble turned, his eyes raking over Belle with a predatory curiosity, struck by her radiant beauty. He recognized her as the daughter of the Claren family, a name that carried the weight of fallen grace. Stood her ground, her voice steady, she demanded the release of the two brothers. From the dirt, the two slaves looked up in stunned silence, unable to believe a noblewoman would intervene for the likes of them. The man approached her, his steps heavy and arrogant, a mocking smile playing on his lips. He loomed over her, his presence oily and suffocating, while Belle looked around at the silent, heartless crowd with mounting disgust. He leaned in close, his breath hot against her ear as he made a revolting proposal. He would spare the slaves if she spent a single night in his bed. Belle recoiled, her face pale with shock and fury at the blatant insult. But before the noble could even blink, a hand as strong as iron clamped around his wrist. Arges had moved with the speed of a shadow, his grip tightening until the noble's bones began to groan. The Duke towered over the smaller man, his eyes glowing with a murderous, crimson light that promised a slow death. The noble let out a pathetic whimper of pain as he struggled to free himself. Arges's voice was a deadly whisper, promising to snap every bone in the man's body if he ever dared to lay a finger on her again. The noble's arrogance vanished instantly, replaced by a trembling terror as he realized he was facing a true monster. Belle crossed her arms, her gaze sharp as she condemned his vulgarity and lack of respect. The man tried to regain some scrap of dignity, mocking the Claren family's bankruptcy and suggesting she was merely selling her looks to the Latham family. He insisted the slaves were his property to punish as he saw fit. From the ground, the younger slave spat out the truth, calling the noble a liar and a disgusting fly who had been the one to initiate the conflict. The older brother could only cough, blood flecking his lips as his strength began to fail. The noble snarled, asserting his rights as an owner over his property. The younger boy's eyes burned with a fierce, untamed fire as he looked at his tormentor. Weakly, the older brother reached toward Belle, his voice a raspy plea for her to save his sibling even as he felt his own life slipping away. He knelt in the dirt, a fallen warrior begging for mercy not for himself, but for the child beside him. Belle's heart fractured at the sight. She looked at the noble and demanded his price, resolved to take them both. She turned to Arges, explaining that she would use the king's money for this one act of mercy. Arges looked at the dying men with clinical detachment, questioning why she would waste gold on two walking corpses. Belle looked him straight in the eye, her spirit unyielding as she declared she could not stand by and watch two lives end before her. Arges felt a strange, unfamiliar tug at his heart, stunned by her reckless compassion. He sighed and told her to do as she pleased, realizing he was becoming irrevocably drawn to her unpredictable nature. Sensing an opportunity to humiliate her, the noble demanded an outrageous price of 1 gold coin. Belle gasped, knowing that in this world, a slave was usually worth no more than a few copper pieces. It was a price meant to rob her, a weight on the scales that far exceeded the value of human life in the eyes of the law. But the noble smirked, revealing that the older slave was no ordinary commoner, but the former royal knight commander of a fallen kingdom. The air in the marketplace was thick with the stench of misery as Belle looked on the two broken souls huddled together, their noble blood now nothing more than a liability in this cruel world of war. The elder of the two coughed violently, staining his hands with a crimson proof of his fading life, while the younger boy looked on with hollow eyes, wondering if this golden-haired lady was truly their salvation. A sleazy merchant with a face full of freckles and a heart full of greed gestured toward them, calling them rare prizes, even as Belle pointedly asked why he had beaten a human being half to death. The merchant scoffed, his arrogance radiating from him as he declared that a single strand of a noble's hair was more than a gold coin, and certainly more than these lowly slaves. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted as Lord Arges stepped forward, his godlike presence casting a long, intimidating shadow as he offered to pay whatever sum was needed, but Belle gestured him to stay back, her eyes burning with a secret fire. Her pink eyes sparkled with a dangerous calculation as she repeated the merchant's words back to him, confirming that he truly believed a noble's hair was that precious. The merchant, sensing Setting no trap, smugly agreed, prompting a sharp smile to cross Belle's face as she declared the situation perfect. With a sudden sharp yank that made the men around her flinch, Belle pulled a golden strand from her own head, her tiny chibi-like determination baffling the greedy man. She held the hair out with rainless grin, offering it as a full trade for the 2 lives and telling him to keep the change. Beside her, the cold and statuesque Arges couldn't help but let out a low chuckle, his heart fluttering at the sheer audacity of the woman before him. Belle turned to the powerful Duke, asking him to witness the deal, and his gaze softened as he confirmed the merchant's own foolish words. Panic finally bled into the merchant's face as he stammered that his words were merely a metaphor, his turning cold under the weight of the situation. Belle immediately played the victim, clutching her head and crying out that the pain of pulling her hair was a grave injury, her internal monologue reveling in the performance. Arges, ever-protective tyrant, leaned in close and asked if it truly hurt, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble as Belle's chibi form wailed over her poor, sacrificed hair. His eyes turned murderous as he looked at the merchant, declaring that harming a noble was a serious crime and demanding the slaves plus 100 gold coins in compensation to settle the matter privately. The merchant's knees shook as the weight of the Duke's authority crushed his pride. Arges placed a possessive hand on Belle's shoulder, his red eyes glowing with a protective light as he promised to back her every move. Defeated and trembling, the merchant handed over the ownership papers, which Belle accepted with a graceful, triumphant nod. She clutched the documents to her chest, her heart dancing at the thought of such a successful, free acquisition. Turning to the hooded figures, she revealed her face, her aura like a blossoming garden, as she asked them to pledge their lives to her. The elder slave, moved by her unexpected, knelt before her and vowed to serve her until his last breath. The younger boy watched her with wide, disbelieving eyes, unable to fathom why a noble would ever care for the consent of a slave. In his eyes, the light reflecting off her golden hair made her look less like a human and more like a descending goddess. To the broken child, she was no longer a stranger, but a divine savior sent from the heavens. Soon, the group arrived at the Grand Palace, its towering spires a stark contrast to the dark corners where they had been found. Inside the lavish room, the wounded man lay pale and shivering on a bed while Arges watched with a cold, detached curiosity, having already summoned the best help money could buy. The Duke reached out to wipe a stray smudge from Belle's hand, his voice laced with a hint of jealousy as he questioned why she was being so tender toward a mere slave. Belle looked him in the eye, and Declaw's lips held equal value. A statement so revolutionary it left the cold tyrant stunned, his mind reeling as she accidentally called him a villain aloud. She quickly tried to soothe his ego, offering a bright smile and insisting he was a good person, though her inner thoughts screamed that he was the final boss of the story she once read. A maid announced the arrival of Dr. Ade, a man whose reputation as a healing mage was as sharp as the glasses perched on his nose. He entered with the grace of a high noble, and Belle realized with a start that this man was the Emperor's personal physician. The doctor adjusted his glasses, looking for the injured noble, only to be met with Belle's urgent plea to treat her servants. He looked toward the bed, his expression unreadable as he assessed the damage. Indignation flared in his voice as he realized he had been summoned for such a lowly task, his pride as a royal doctor clearly wounded. Belle didn't care for his ego, physically shoving the man toward the dying patient and demanding he do his job before the man stopped breathing. Watching her intense worry, felt a pang of envy, his gaze darkening as he asked if she would show him the same concern if he were the one in pain. Belle tried to laugh it off, saying a man as strong as him would never fall ill, but his red eyes pinned her in place, demanding a real answer. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she finally whispered a soft yes, a response that seemed to finally satisfy the possessive beast within him. The doctor finally began his work, his movements precise and cold. Magic circles glowed in the air, but then he produced a searing flame, intending to use the primitive method of cauterization. Belle's jaw dropped in horror as she realized he was about to burn the man, her modern screaming at the barbaric medical practices of this world. She abruptly told the doctor to leave, her voice firm as she decided to take matters into her own hands. The doctor left with a huff of disdain, assuming she was simply discarding a lost cause. The young boy's heart shattered, his hands gripping the bed sheets as he accused Belle of being a liar and no goddess at all. Arges stepped in to silence the boy's disrespect, his presence suffocating as he reminded the child of Belle's mercy. The boy's tears flowed freely as he wailed that they were all frauds, his hope completely extinguished. Belle didn't flinch, her voice soft and steady as she asked if she had ever actually said she wouldn't help. Arges watched her with renewed interest, his eyes tracking her every move as she began to prepare a strange device. She unveiled a makeshift distillation setup, her face lighting up with a professional confidence that was entirely foreign to a noble lady. She explained her plan to create distilled alcohol to prevent infection, terms that left the Duke looking utterly bewildered. The young boy watched her with a mix of suspicion and desperate hope, wondering if a lady of the court could truly possess such life-saving secrets. Belle worked with a focused intensity, dismissing the primitive use of leeches and fire aver of the clean, cold science she remembered from her past life. The boy's hesitation began to melt away as he saw the logic in her movements, his eyes filling with wonder. Arges remained silent, his sharp mind analyzing her every gesture, his suspicion warring with the trust he felt for the woman he fancied. Belle caught his gaze and felt a jolt of panic, realizing that displaying such advanced knowledge might make the dangerous final boss suspect her. Thinking quickly, she spun a lie about finding these methods in the old journals of her ancestors, her heart racing as she hoped he would buy the fabrication. Belle spins a web of lies, attributing her modern medical knowledge to the dusty journals of Count Clarence's sea voyages. Behind her sweet smile, she prays that her fabricated stories remain unchallenged, her heart fluttering with the secret of her past life. Lord Arges watches her with an intensity that feels like a physical weight, wondering how a mere girl of 17 could possess such profound wisdom. His thoughts drift to the dark history of the Latham family, who returned from their voyages not with knowledge, but with a bloodthirsty curse that transformed men into monsters. He dreams of a future where that curse is shattered by the secrets within her journals, allowing him to claim her and build a life together. When she catches his gaze and asks if he has words for her, he chooses silence, vowing to earn her heart through devotion rather than force. Meanwhile, in the hallowed halls of the royal temple, a figure of divine authority learns the girl who defied a goddess and rescued a lost prince. His golden eyes shimmer with a dangerous curiosity as he notes that her presence has rewritten the fabric of fate. He declares that the prophecy has been shattered and the child destined for death now breathes, a miracle he must witness for himself. A single rose glows in his hand as he decides he must confront this little outlier in person. In the quiet of the palace, young Milcrew is haunted by the ghosts of the Lower Kingdom. Remember the night his father pushed him toward a desperate escape. The memory of his father's blood-streaked face and the command to survive as the nation's last hope burns in his mind. He recalls the ultimate sacrifice of Duke Orlando, who gave up his own son to shield the prince's identity as they fled into the shadows of a slave caravan. They had fallen into a pit of misery until Belle reached out like a beacon of light, pulling them from the clutches of vile nobles. Now, as she enters his room, with the grace of an angel, he sees her as his only savior. She brings news that his brother's fever has finally broken, her voice a soothing balm to his fractured soul. When she asks for his name, he casts aside his royal identity, claiming he has none left in this world of ruin. Gently, she bestows the name William upon him, promising not to pry into the wounds of his past. Overwhelmed by her kindness, the boy declares that she is now his entire reason for existing. Belle looks at him with eyes full of a wisdom gained from past life of selfless sacrifice, urging him to live for himself rather than for others. Yet, he wonders how any meaning can be found when everything he loved has turned to ash. Later, in the sun-drenched courtyard, Belle's playful complaints about the rich palace food are met with Arges's unexpected tenderness as he assures her that true love sees beyond outward beauty. He turns to her, his movements predatory and graceful, causing her heart to skip a beat as she wonders if another proposal is imminent. Desperate to escape the suffocating tension, she calls for her familiar Lolo to intervene and change the script of this unfolding drama. But Arges is undeterred, leaning in until his breath fans her cheek, his eyes dark with a hunger he can no longer hide. Just as the world seems to narrow down to his lips, William bursts into the garden with a joyful cry that his brother is awake. Arges's face contorts into a mask of pure, unadulterated frustration as the romantic moment is shattered. In the infirmary, Glenn's eyes finally open, his gratitude pouring out to the lady who snatched them from death's door. Belle graciously shifts the credit to Arges, unaware of the murderous radiating from the man whose confession was just trampled by a child. Despite his internal rage, Arges maintains his cold composure, commanding the brothers to dedicate their lives to serving their new master with unwavering loyalty. Glenn, the former knight commander, now a scarred and humble servant, acknowledges the new reality with a heavy heart. To keep the fallen royalty safe, they must hide in plain sight, masquerading as mere attendants, to avoid the deadly hunt of their enemies who seek the crown prince. Belle looks upon Glenn's battle-worn body, his skin a map of past violence, as he accepts the name she has bestowed upon him with a bow of submission. She probes into the fate of the other knights, realizing that in this world, a private army is the only true currency of power and a symbol of one's nobility. If she is to protect her burgeoning sugar empire and the territory of Genus, she cannot rely on a powerful husband. She needs the steel of the Lower Kingdom's lost soldiers. Glenn kneels before her, a titan surrendering to her will, pledging to reclaim his brothers from the slave markets at her command. As the sun bleeds across the horizon, the looming hunting competition casts a long shadow over the Latham estate. Lord Arges, his silver hair shimmering like moonlight, expresses his regret that he must represent his alone rather than accompanying her. He searches her eyes with a quiet intensity, desperate to know if she will truly return to Genus after the dust of the competition settles. Belle sighs, her mind a whirlwind of scandals and merchant guilds, barely noticing the depth of the emotion behind his question. Suddenly, his hand flashes out, catching her arm with a grip that is both possessive and desperate. He presses a magical spatial ring ring into her palm, a priceless heirloom from his mother, claiming it is a small price for her safety in these dangerous times. His crimson eyes burn with an unsettling heat as he declares her more valuable than any treasure he possesses. He leans in close, his breath ghosting against her skin as he promises to win the sacred medal just for her. The royal hunting grounds are alive with the scent of pine and the nervous energy of thoroughbreds. Belle stands amidst the finery, her hunting leathers cinched tight, looking more like a warrior than a delicate countess. A stubborn beast blows a defiant breath into her face, and despite its temper, she feels a strange kinship with the creature. She reaches out to the animal, its wild eyes reflecting her own determination. Her touch is steady and firm, calming the beast that others find too difficult to handle. Much to the stable hand's shock, she chooses the cantankerous horse, her eyes flashing with a hidden fire that defies social norms. The air at the high society gathering is thick with political poison as the reclusive empress and the nobility watch the spectacle unfold. Belle knows this hunt is not just a game, but a stage where lives are bartered for status and power. The emperor uses the competition to tighten his leash on the aristocracy, shaping their behavior with rewards and punishments. Belle's heart hammers against her ribs as she catches the sharp, predatory gaze of the villain across the clearing. Panic flares within her, urging her to flee from that suffocating, red-eyed attention. She ducks behind the ancient trees, trying to reclaim her dignity as the Countess of Claren while her pulse races. But the forest offers no refuge from a man who commands the shadows and sees through every deception. Arges whispers into her ear, his voice a low vibration that sends shivers down her spine. He traps her against the rough bark, his silhouette tall and intimidating as he looms over her. With a flick of his wrist, he reveals he used magic to bridge the distance between them, appearing out of thin air. He mocks her fear, his eyes searching her face for any sign of the bravado she showed before she tried to hide. He demands to know if she was spying on him, his proximity making it impossible for her to think clearly. His gaze drops to her bare hand, noting with a dark edge to his voice that she is not wearing the ring he gave her. Belle stammers about a secret mission, her face flushing with the effort of her desperate lies. The word mission catches in his throat, his eyes narrowing into dangerous, glowing slits of suspicion. He dismisses her excuses about damaging the ring, reminding her that its very purpose is to hide her from the jaws of death. His jealousy flares like a wildfire as he mentions the name of his brother Syl, his voice dripping with icy disdain. Belle freezes, the weight of the original story's plot pressing down on her like a physical burden. He looms over her, a statuesque figure of silver and gold, his presence completely overwhelming her senses. He asks what he must do to purge Syl from her heart forever, his resignation more terrifying than his anger. She insists she has no feelings for the hero, her mind screaming that Syl belongs to the original heroine. Arges searches her eyes with an intensity that seems to pierce her soul, looking for a truth she isn't sure she can give. The moment is shattered as Syl appears, his purple hair vibrant against the greenery, his voice laced with mockery. The tension in the royal hunting grounds becomes a physical weight, suffocating all warmth. Arges steps forward, a living shield between Belle and his brother, his protective instinct flaring. They trade barbs of blood and worthiness, two wolves circling the same prey with bared teeth. Syl's eyes turn to Belle, questioning her loyalty and asking if she is truly dating his brother. She tries to diminish their bond to mere friendship, but Arges's expression darkens with every word she speaks. Syl laughs, pointing out that a man does not gift his mother's soul-bound spatial ring to a casual acquaintance. Arges commands his brother to focus on the hunt rather than the spies he keeps in the shadows. Syl vows to humiliate him, to win the medal and reclaim his place at the head of the family. The air between the brothers crackles with a murderous intent that leaves no room for mercy. As Belle tries to slip away from the impending storm, Syl stops her with a final poisonous word of advice. He tells her Arges is a hollow man, only feigning affection to spite his own blood, and that she will be discarded the moment she is no longer useful. The air crackled with unspoken tension as the statuesque Lord Arges loomed over the scene, his silver hair catching the light like a halo of frost. Before him, the young Lady Heidi trembled, had bowed in a display of practiced submission that did little to soothe the cold fire in his eyes. He stepped forward, his presence suffocatingly grand as he declared that the fault lay not with her, but with his own sudden movements. The heroine watched them, her heart a frantic rhythm against her ribs as she realized the hero was paralyzed by the fear of exposing his own vulnerabilities to the villain standing before them. Arges's gaze sharpened, a flash of irritation crossing his godlike features as he wondered why she would ever choose to defend an outsider over the man who had just saved her life. The arrival of Lord Syl, perched arrogantly atop his steed, only served to heighten the animosity in the clearing. The two men locked eyes, a silent war of pride and power erupting between them as they exchanged sharp sharp barbs about the ongoing hunt. Distraught and caught in the crossfire of their egos, Heidi could only watch with watery eyes as the competition threatened to tear everything apart. Knowing the stakes of the sacred metal were too high, the heroine urged the girl to leave and regain her composure for the sake of the task at hand. Under the watchful, emerald green eyes of her companions, Heidi felt the weight of her family's expectations crushing her spirit. With a final, desperate gesture of farewell, she turned her horse toward the horizon, determined not to let the Mountbatten name fall into disgrace. She galloped away, her heart heavy with the need to prove herself to a father who demanded nothing less than perfection. Syl followed shortly after, his jaw set in a grim line of determination to best his rival. As the dust settled and the rivals vanished into the forest, the heroine finally let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her relief was short-lived, however, as she realized her own horse had bolted, leaving her stranded with the very man she feared most. Arges looked down at her, his expression a mixture of exasperation and something far more dangerous as he lamented her sheer hopelessness. Before she could protest, his large, warm hand found the small of her back. A touch sent a jolt of electricity through her entire frame. Her face flushed a deep crimson, her breath hitching at the sudden, overwhelming proximity of the cold tyrant. With effortless strength, he hoisted her up onto his own saddle, his solid, intimidating wall of heat behind her. He murmured that the forest was far too treacherous for her to be left alone, his voice dropping to a low, velvet caress. She sat frozen, wondering why this man, the villain of her story, was sacrificing his own chance at the competition just to ensure her safety. Sensing her internal turmoil, he asked if she was truly worried for him, his eyes searching hers for a flicker of genuine emotion. She stammered out a confession of her concern, moved by a kindness she never expected to find in a heart supposedly made of stone. As they rode together, the world narrowed down to the scent of his skin and the steady beat of his heart against her back. She felt lightheaded, the intimacy of the moment blurring the lines between her mission and her mounting feelings. Arges leaned closer, his breath fanning against her ear as he questioned the intoxicatingly sweet scent that clung to her. He confessed that he had never allowed another woman to be this close to him, his voice thick with a vulnerability that shattered her defenses. Only she had the power to make him act so wildly out of character, an admission that left her heart racing in her chest. Suddenly, a violent rustling in the undergrowth shattered the romantic haze. Both of them tensed, their eyes scanning the dense foliage as the horse shifted uneasily beneath them. A massive, snarling bear burst from the shadows, its eyes wild with predatory hunger. The horse let out a terrified neigh, rearing back as the beast closed in. Panic surged through her, but Arges's grip tightened around her waist, his voice a calm anchor in the chaos. He told her not to fear because he was there to protect her. Light erupted from his palm as a complex magic circle materialized in the air. With a surge of raw, ancient power, he summoned a bow of shimmering blue light, ready to strike down any threat that dared to approach his chosen one. Belle cowered as the air crackled with tension, her breath hitching as she pleaded for the mysterious figure to stay back. Her violet eyes widened in a mix of terror and fascination, catching the sight of polished boots as a magnificent figure descended from his steed. Before her lay the massive carcass of a beast brought down not by luck, but by a magic arrow of immense power. It was a terrifying display of strength that reminded her of her own vulnerability in this world, where she longed for the power to protect herself. As she spiraled into her thoughts, the man reached out, his voice a low hum as he explained that magic was not merely about talent, but something far deeper. His slender fingers seemed to carry the weight of his authority. He leaned down, a statuesque presence of silver hair and sharp features, promising that she need not worry because he would be her shield. Belle's heart did a frantic dance, her mind racing with the realization that this supposed villain was flirting with her once again. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of his men, reporting that the competition was nearing its end. With a dismissive air, Arges commanded his subordinates to take the prize, his eyes already fixed on the sacred metal that would soon be his. As the tiny, hard-working attendants scurried away with the massive bear, felt a sudden jolt of panic, realizing she was about to lose her only chance to change the future. Swallowing her pride, she tugged at his sleeve and asked if he would give the beast to her instead. She knew the stakes were high. If the villain won the medal, he would use the victory to propose and seal her fate. Arges paused, his gaze searching hers as he questioned if she truly wanted it. His eyes were like embers burning with an intensity that made her want to look away. Overcome with guilt, she avoided his gaze and confirmed her request, wondering if he would truly give up his triumph over his rival just for her. Without a single moment of hesitation, he declared that the bear was hers, promising he would give her anything her heart desired. As the bear was redirected to the Claren estate, Belle could hardly believe her luck, watching in a daze as her plan actually worked. Arges stepped closer, his presence warm and suffocating all at once, murmuring that the sacred metal was always meant for her regardless of who held it. When she questioned his overwhelming kindness, her conscience pricked at her like 1,000 needles. He didn't flinch, even when she asked what he would do if she one day caused him pain. He reached out to touch her golden hair, his voice a silken vow as he confessed he would accept any hurt from her willingly. His gaze was a trap of fire and devotion, leaving Belle breathless and trembling as she realized the depth of his obsession. Her mind was a whirlwind of confusion and fear, unsure of how to handle a man who offered his heart so freely. She could feel the heat rising to her cheeks, her pulse thrumming in her ears as she tried to process his words. The blare of a hunting horn cut through the tension, signaling the end of the competition and the arrival of the Emperor. The crowd gathered in a hushed frenzy, whispering about the legendary Alpha Wolf and the illegitimate son of Duke Latham. The Emperor stood before the nobility, his expression unreadable as he prepared to announce the champion. A heavy silence fell over the grounds until he finally declared the winner to be the Countess Clarin. Shock rippled through the audience like a tidal wave, and Belle stood frozen, the weight of the unexpected victory pressing down on her. Her rivals gasped in disbelief, their faces contorted with jealousy, as they watched the girl they despised ascend to glory. One noblewoman seethed in silence, her plans for her own victory crumbling into dust. The political landscape shifted in an instant. Mothers began whispering to their sons that Belle was now the Emperor's favorite and must be pursued for marriage at any cost. Even as Arges's own men lamented that the honor should have been his, the silver-haired lord remained unmoved, his eyes only for the woman he had chosen to crown. Deep within the shadows of Count Clarin's mansion, a sinister plot unfolding as the conspirators whispered of Belle's impending return and the destruction she might bring. With a chilling smile and a gaze that held no mercy, the man promised that the young lady's journey to Janus would be her last, destined to end in a brutal ambush by bandits. The woman's eyes gleamed with cold malice as she envisioned the Count finally reuniting with his daughter in the afterlife, while elsewhere, the unsuspecting Belle stood amidst a mountain of tribute. Her companion noted her immense popularity in the royal city, but Belle merely sighed, her golden hair shimmering as she dismissed the noble's flattery as nothing more than a calculated move to profit from her sugar business. Her composure wavered slightly when a servant presented a letter from the formidable Duke Mountbatten's estate, a name that carried the weight of absolute power. As she read Heidi's words of gratitude for the sacred metal that had mended her family ties, Belle's mind raced with suspicion, certain that the cold Duke was merely using the girl to secure his own commercial interests. However, her thoughts soon drifted to Arges, and her heart sank when she learned he had sent no word or gift, confirming her fears that his anger ran deep and silent. A heavy weight settled in her chest as she realized her frequent rejections might have finally driven the stoic man away, leaving her to face her departure with a hollow sense of loss. The pain was sharp and unexpected, a suffocating ache that made it hard to breathe as she clutched the paper to her chest, her eyes wide with a sudden, desperate realization of her own buried feelings. Suddenly, a familiar chime echoed in her mind as the system announced a reward, prompting Belle to frantically hide her blushing face and insist with a trembling voice that they were merely friends. Her initial disappointment at receiving a simple map for her life-risking mission was palpable as she looked at the scroll. Yet, the system revealed it was a resource map showing hidden minerals at Black Bear Mountain, igniting a spark of ambition in her eyes as she realized she was looking at a fortune. Her tactical mind began to whirl with plans to secure mining rights in the no man's land, but her calculations were shattered by the sudden, urgent announcement of Arges's arrival. The rhythmic, heavy clank of metal against the floor heralded his approach, and Belle's breath caught as she saw him standing there, a statuesque and intimidating figure in shimmering silver armor. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird as she took in his warlike appearance, her voice small and filled with dread as she asked if he was heading to the front lines. The air grew heavy with the scent of iron and impending war as Arges revealed that his father had been injured at the borders, and he was leaving immediately to lead the defense of the Empire. As dusk bleeds across the sky, Belle huddles in the shadows of the forest, her golden hair a beacon she desperately tries to hide while worrying if her mysterious savior has abandoned her with her precious crest. The biting chill of the evening air forces a sneeze from her trembling lips, and she resolves to save herself if help does not arrive within the hour. Suddenly, the heavy tread of boots, the silence as pursuers close in, their voices cold as they search for the girl they believe should have died from the fall. Two men in dark armor through the thicket, and Belle grips a wooden branch as her only defense, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Every breath is a struggle as she prays to remain unseen, the sound of her own pulse deafening in her ears. The bushes part and a cruel blade catches the light. She is found. Cornered and desperate, she glares at her captors who demand the secret to her sugar formula, their eyes devoid of any mercy. A sudden, sickening spray of crimson paints the leaves as a sword pierces her attacker from behind, and the statuesque figure of Glyn emerges from the carnage. Belle remains dazed, the sudden violence leaving her breathless as her loyal knight calls out to her. Glyn and William kneel before her, their voices thick with remorse for their late arrival. Overwhelmed with relief, Belle pulls William into a desperate embrace, her heart finally slowing as she feels the warmth of his presence. Glyn reports that the threat has been neutralized and the caravan secured, ensuring no one can escape the consequences of this betrayal. Belle gazes at them with newfound appreciation, her heart swelling at their unwavering unwavering loyalty. William questions how she survived such a terrifying height, and she reveals that Arges's ring protected her, though a sharp pain in her sprained ankle reminds her of the cost. In the quiet of the forest, she makes a silent vow to no longer flee from the feeling stirrings within her. The masked man steps from the shadows, his presence as intimidating as it is graceful, and returns her stolen crest. When she offers a reward for her life, he shocks her by requesting to become her manservant. His eyes, burning with an unreadable intensity, search hers as he explains his desire to witness the one who overturned the prophecy. Memories of the holy children, the coveted pawns of the lawyer and Charlemagne Empire flicker through her mind. He speaks of the Flay Empire's blood-soaked history and how a mere countess managed to save a soul abandoned by the divine. Despite her concerns regarding his family, he claims to be alone in the world, and Belle finds herself unable to refuse his service. He kneels with a godlike grace, pressing a reverent kiss to her hand and swearing that he now belongs to her alone. Later, beneath the pale glow of the moon, Belle sips hot tea as Glenn reports the grim tally of the dead and wounded. Her gaze is sharp as she asks for the identity of those who sought her blood. Glenn reveals a dual betrayal: bandits hired by her own stepmother and knights sent by greedy nobles. The realization that her return to Janus will mean war for her stepmother hardens Belle's resolve. Beside her, William is consumed by a quiet guilt, fearing that his own identity as a holy child has brought this danger upon her. Glenn worries that the truth might drive Belle away, but her sudden, melodic giggle breaks the tension. She looks at them with a fierce, protective light in her eyes, declaring that since she bought them, no noble would dare touch what is hers. She silences William's protests, telling him his past is irrelevant and that she will be his shield. William is moved to his core by her shameless courage and kindness. As she smiles at him, he resolves to be the blade that strikes down her enemies. Turning back to Glenn, she hands him a directive, her mind already spinning a web of revenge. She commands him to report her death to the Count's mansion, eager to see what drama her enemies will cook up in her absence. Throughout the night, she feels the suffocating weight of Johann's gaze. He watches her with a focus that makes her skin prickle, and she wonders if he is judging her every move. Finally, she invites him to join them by the fire. When she confronts him about his staring, he offers a devastatingly charming smile. His voice ups an octave as he suggests it is simply because she is so beautiful, causing a rare blush to stain her cheeks. She quickly dismisses the flutter in her chest, assuming he only envies her unmarred face because of the scars hidden beneath his mask. Trying to shift the conversation, she credits her survival to luck, but he insists it was the protection of the goddess. Belle's response is cold and sharp, declaring herself an atheist and ignoring his warning about the church's wrath. He leans back, his presence godlike and mocking, as he asks her view on the eternal struggle between the magic tower and the church. Belle recalls the hidden lore of the original story, a tragic history of a princess's death and a tower master's undying hatred. As she looks into the dancing flames, she prepares to share her own perspective. Belle looks at the masked man and softly offers to tell him a story of her own. Long ago, a grand temple stood as a testament to the deity Gwynion, a place where the desperate sought solace within its hallowed walls. Yet, the true divine lesson was found not in distant gods, but in the goddess kneeling in the flesh, teaching that one must ultimately rely on themselves to survive the storms of life. Belle clutched this philosophy close to her heart, her golden eyes reflecting a soul that refused to bow to supernatural whims or hollow prayers. The peace of the evening was shattered by a sudden sharp rustle in the undergrowth. Steel shrieked as it was drawn from its scabbard, the air thick with the threat of hidden enemies as the guards demanded the intruder show themselves. From the shadows emerged Lord Arges, his statuesque form battered and his silver hair messy, his face stained with the crimson evidence of a brutal struggle. Belle's heart hammered against her ribs as she hurried him towards safety, her hands trembling as she began to tend to the jagged wounds marking his pale, muscular skin. Arges's eyes burned with a cold, protective fury, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl as he cursed the incompetence of the men he had trusted to keep her safe. He could not forgive that she had been forced to the very edge of a precipice because of their failure, his chest heaving with a mix of exhaustion and rage. Belle gently hushed his scolding, her gaze soft as she urged him to believe in her own strength rather than drowning in guilt. A heavy silence fell between them as she admitted her fear of being a burden, her eyes welling with the weight of her perceived weakness. Arges reached out, his hand a warm and steady presence atop her head, as he insisted that his injuries were his own fault for underestimating the foe and begged her not to blame herself. His gaze softened into something far more dangerous than his sword, confessing that she was the singular reason he found the will to protect their country. He admitted that he had never expected to fall for her so completely, and now he could no longer envision a world where she did not stand by his side. Under the silver glow of the moon, he pulled her close, their lips meeting in a desperate, heart-fluttering kiss that seemed to seal their intertwined fates among the flowers. Even in the aftermath, his playful spirit remained, teasing her to help him dress because his injuries, a smirk dancing on his lips as her cheeks burned with a vivid blush. They were not alone in the shadows, however, as watchful eyes tracked their every move from the darkness. Whispers of the cursed House Latham followed Arges like a ghost, servants gossiping about a bloodline that supposedly could never find true union with ordinary women. A masked man watched the unfolding drama with a chilling detachment, his presence an enigma that felt entirely too calculated to be mere coincidence. The purple-haired guard wondered if Arges's appearance was truly an accident of fate or something far more orchestrated. Rumors swirled around his brother, Sil Latham, and the untouchable, almost divine aura that surrounded their noble house. The guard felt an instinctive chill in the masked man's presence, sensing a power that should not be trifled with. Deep within the Empire's shadows, a more sinister plot was taking root, involving the Flay Empire and a desperate attempt to use Sil to assassinate the Holy Child. The masked man found the Countess's choice of company to be truly remarkable, his smile hidden, but his intent clear as he plotted his next move. The time for farewells came too soon, Arges preparing to return to the front lines where the fires of war still raged. Belle's voice was a fragile plea, begging him to return without further scars and to ignore whatever dark rumors might follow her name. He held up a ring, a shimmering token of her protection that he vowed would keep him from harm while they were apart. Taking her hand in his, he promised to end the conflict swiftly and return to her victorious. He pressed his advantage, proposing once more and asking her to search her heart and consider his offer until he returned to her side. Belle was paralyzed by the invisible lines of their world, fearing that a mere background character and a villain were never meant for a happy ending. Arges's resolve was ironclad, vowing that he would ask 100 times or 100 more until she finally said yes. He pulled her into a final, suffocating embrace, promising that no matter what happened, he would never ever give up on her. Elsewhere, the air was thick with the scent of lilies and the sound of practiced sobbing as the Countess staged a grand funeral for the deceased Belle Clarin. The burial was set to proceed, a final act to steal Belle's inheritance under the guise of maternal grief. But the mourners froze as a figure in a familiar, vibrant violet gown appeared at the edge of the graveyard. Belle stood tall beside her masked companion, watching the spectacle of her own death with a sharp, mocking smile. The Countess's face drained of color, her fake tear drying instantly as she looked upon the girl she thought was buried. Panic rippled through the funeral as the lies began to unravel, the mother and her accomplice stuttering in terror as their scheme collapsed before their eyes. Belle walked through the center of the congregation like a vengeful spirit to claim what was hers, leaving the guests to whisper of walking corpses and the mystery of the bandits. The Countess tried desperately to usher the witnesses away, her voice shrill with the need to hide her family scandal. Back within the cold walls of the mansion, the true interrogation began. On her knees, the woman who had called herself a mother begged for mercy, her dignity stripped away as she claimed her innocence. She quickly turned on her lover, pointing a trembling finger and accusing him of hiring the assassins to kill her own daughter. The masked man watched the lovers tear each other apart with a look of pure, dark amusement, savoring the complexity of human betrayal. He noted with a cold finality that the penalty for attempting to murder a lord was a capital offense, a fate they had surely earned through their greed. Belle sat with a chilling composure as she watched the woman before her crumble into a state of pure, unadulterated shock. With a voice as sharp as a guillotine, she revealed her knowledge of the woman's secret pregnancy, offering no mercy as the traitorous mistress was dragged away, her desperate pleas for life falling on deaf ears. Johann, ever the observer, questioned why she had chosen exile over death, his golden gaze searching her face for a sign of weakness. Belle merely laughed, calling him a tyrant for his bloodthirsty suggestions, a title that made the masked man pause and reflect on the heavy crown he truly wore and the ghost of a student he had once failed. As Johann watched her with a mixture of intrigue and a strange, buried longing, he couldn't help but see the shadow of another child in her defiant spirit. But the time for reflection was short, for Belle had a territory to reclaim, her eyes burning with a violet fire as she prepared to face the remnants of a broken household. Standing before the assembled servants, her presence was suffocating, a true mistress returning to her throne. With every step, she purged the disloyal, her silken skirts whispering a promise of change as she cast out those who had bitten the hand that fed them. "I am the only master of House Clarin," she declared, her heart swelling with the triumph of finally reclaiming her father's stolen legacy. Far away in a sun-drenched military camp, the cold and distant Arges tended to his wounds, his fingers tracing the medicine bottles Belle had pressed into his hands with such fierce concern. His comrades watched in stunned silence, unable to believe that the man known as a frozen statue actually possessed a friend who cared for his well-being. Arges ignored their prying eyes, his mind drifting back to the moment she had begged him to return safely, her voice a melody he couldn't forget. He looked at the potions, realizing their value was far greater than gold, a testament to the genius of the woman waiting for him. These remedies were more potent than the church's holy water, a secret weapon that could change the tide of any war. His superior's greedy suggestions to buy the formula were met with stony silence. Arges had no intention of letting anyone exploit her brilliance. Back at the mansion, Belle was a whirlwind of productivity, ignoring her own exhaustion as she buried herself in ledgers and tax reports, much to the worry of her young aide. A sudden knock interrupted her mountain of work, heralding the the arrival of her trusted allies. Johann and Glenn entered with news of a monumental victory. Their sugar trade had successfully shattered the church's ancient monopoly, bringing unprecedented wealth to the region. Johann's gaze was sharp, his admiration for her ruthless business mind growing with every passing second. However, the victory was seasoned with a warning, as Glenn revealed that the Emperor's royal knights had arrived at their doorstep. Belle knew the Emperor's protection was nothing more than a gilded cage, a move by Steve Barna to keep the rising star of Claren under his thumb. Steeling herself, she made her way to the Great Hall, her chin held high as she prepared to face the imperial guests. There stood Marquis Arundel, the holy child of the Empire, his smile radiating a practiced charm that didn't quite reach his eyes. He spoke of missing her, his flirtations as transparent as glass. He claimed to have joined the knights. Just catch a glimpse of her face. Belle was unimpressed by his theatrics, her heart remaining as cold as a winter morning as she listened to his hollow professions of affection. To test his resolve, she laid out a condition she thought impossible. To marry her, he must abandon his own name and join the Claren family. The hall went silent as Arund's eyes widened. But the shock was short-lived as he surprisingly agreed to her outrageous demand. Johann watched the drama unfold with a smirk, but the amusement vanished the moment a deep, commanding voice cut through the air, stating that she would do no such thing. Arges marched into the hall, his presence like a thunderstorm that swept away the Marquis's flowery atmosphere. He pulled Belle against his chest in a possessive embrace, his eyes flashing with a murderous light as he warned the Marquis to know his place. The touch was electric, sending a jolt of panic and heat through Belle's veins as she looked up at the man who had suddenly returned from the front lines. Arges didn't flinch as the Marquis questioned his sanity, accusing him of throwing away his succession just for a woman. Arundel's voice dripped with poison as he suggested Arges was merely after the sugar profits, a common greed masquerading as love. But Arges was resolute, revealing he had already secured the Emperor's blessing for their union, a move that left Belle breathless and cornered. The air crackled with tension as Arges challenged the Marquis, proving he was willing to sacrifice everything to stand by her side. He would give up his very heritage to be her husband, a declaration that left Belle's heart racing in a chaotic rhythm. Suddenly, a terrifying crimson warning flickered before her eyes, the system screaming about a main plot deviation that threatened to tear the world apart. The villain's goals had changed, and the system's cold, mechanical voice warned her that if she didn't correct path immediately, she would pay with her life. Hours later, the weight of the world felt suffocating as she sat alone, her mind a battlefield of fear and confusion, while Johann offered his ears as a confessor, unaware of the digital sentence hanging over her head. Sasha stands by the window, her heart pounding like a trapped bird as she asks Johann if one should choose a brief moment of love or the safety of a world without it. Johann, his face a statuesque mask of indifference, confesses that the world has grown so dull to him that he would choose love in a heartbeat. He urges her to live for the present, his voice low and steady as he explains that the future is shaped by the passions of today. Sasha's mind spirals back to the original narrative of Syl and Heidi, realizing that because the villainess has reformed, the world is literally beginning to collapse around them. She decides then and there that she must become the new villain to stabilize the story, rushing away with a resolve that leaves Johann intrigued by her sudden fire. She finds Arges, the cold tyrant with hair like spun silver, who corners her with a gaze so suffocatingly intense it steals the air from her lungs. His eyes are like shards of ice, yet they burn with a hidden, desperate need as he demands to know why she is leaving. He is certain she has come to crush his soul by rejecting his proposal, but his world shifts its axis when she calmly tells him that she accepts. The silver-haired man is paralyzed by a joy so violent he fears his heart might stop, and he swears to belong only to her for all eternity. In his gaze, she sees herself reflected as his entire world, a devotion so absolute it is almost frightening. He pulls her into his orbit amidst a sea of roses, his touch firm and possessive as he tells her she must now take responsibility for the heart she has claimed. Standing before her subjects as the new Countess of Genus, Sasha acknowledges the fragility and poverty of their territory with a heavy heart. However, a sharp, villainous glint enters her eyes as she announces that she has found the key to their salvation. She introduces Arges as her fiancé, his presence a godlike shield for her people. While Arges promises to merge his strength hers, Sasha maintains her territory's independence, vowing to play the part of the villain to protect the timeline. Johann watches the spectacle with a dark fascination, realizing that life around this girl will never be boring again. The air in the room was heavy with the scent of ambition as Buck Stoter, the master of the Flay Royal Commerce Guild, leaned back with a predator's grace. He laid out his demands with a cold, calculating smile, insisting on the secret sugar formula in exchange for his cooperation. Lord Syl Latham's face paled, his eyes widening as the weight of the unfair proposal crashed down upon him. Stoter merely chuckled, his voice dripping with the arrogance of a man who knew he held all the cards, offering to end their deal if the terms were too bitter to swallow. Syl's mind raced, his frustration mounting as he realized he was being outmaneuvered by the very woman he sought to ruin, Belle. Desperation clawed at his throat as he called out to stop the guildmaster, his pride stinging from the thought of losing to a woman. With a sharp inhale, he vowed to seize that formula before his brother Arges could ever lay a hand on it. As he swept through the corridors, his steps echoing with newfound resolve, he commanded his aide to prepare a visit to the Claren estate. When reminded of his prior engagement with Miss Heidi Mountbatten, he came to a sudden halt, a devious plan forming in the shadows of his mind. He decided then that the innocent Heidi would be his shield. Belle could never refuse a visit if the sweet girl was by his side. Upon their arrival at Janus, Heidi's eyes sparkled with a naive joy that seemed out of place in such a den of schemes. Belle welcomed them with a grace that was as sharp as a blade, though Syl's attention was immediately captured by the statuesque, masked man silently behind her. A shiver of unease raced down Syl's spine as he felt a wave of suffocatingly powerful magical energy radiating from the mysterious servant. Despite the tension, they settled into a parlor that felt more like a battlefield, the masked man watching Syl with eyes that felt godlike in their intensity. The stranger claimed to be a mere servant, but his presence suggested a power that Syl could not ignore. As tea was served, Belle presented delicate confections that shimmered like jewels, all crafted from her coveted white sugar. Heidi's delight was infectious, her praise for Belle's skill warming the room, while Syl found himself increasingly unnerved by the treasure trove of talent Belle seemed to possess. Belle watched Heidi with a gaze that was both pitying and protective, thinking the girl far too innocent for the hero's world. When Heidi attempted to feed Syl a sweet, his heart hammered not with love, but with the cold calculation of a man planning to use her feelings to steal Belle's secrets. Belle's voice cut through the air like a whip, calling the display improper and sending a flush of shame to Heidi's cheeks. The poor girl stood abruptly, her eyes welling with tears of embarrassment, but Belle smoothed over the tension with a shark-like smile, offering to let Heidi feed her instead. As Belle playfully took the strawberry from Heidi's hand, Syl felt a surge of jealousy and provocation, his teeth gritting as he steered the conversation back to his true goal: the sugar trade. He spoke of business with a voice like velvet masking the greed beneath. Belle countered his points with a sharp intellect, noting the limits of her own workforce. Seeing his opening, Syl leaned in, proposing a partnership where he would handle everything in exchange for the formula and a split of the profits. Behind his charming facade, his thoughts were a whirlwind of malice, focused solely on the power the formula would bring him. Belle turned to the blushing Heidi, asking what she would do in such a situation. Heidi's answer was a testament to her devotion, her eyes shining as she declared she would give Syl anything he desired. Syl felt a momentary flicker of satisfaction, believing Heidi to be the only soul in the world who truly cared for him. He envisioned the flageled bowing before him once he controlled the Empire's sugar. But the atmosphere froze as Belle calmly declined, her voice steady as she spoke of an important man who already held her loyalty. Syl's blood ran cold, his mind spinning with the possibility that she had replaced him or Arges during the war. Suddenly, a voice like rolling thunder filled the room as a man draped in black feathers stepped forward, claiming Belle as his own. Arges had returned, his presence filling the room with an intimidating aura as he looked down at his brother. He ignored Syl's shock, his gaze softening only when it landed on Belle, admitting he had rushed home simply because he missed her too much. With a possessive grace, he pulled her into a firm embrace, his eyes burning with a protective fire. He acted the part of a devoted lover, pouting like a puppy to elicit a reaction from her. Syl's face twisted in a mask of fury and confusion at his brother's unexpected arrival. He couldn't comprehend why Arges was here instead of attending to their father's business. Arges's voice dropped an octave as he declared Belle to be his fiancée, his eyes narrowing at Syl's audacity. The room erupted in silent shock, Syl's heart pounding as he accused his brother of losing his mind. Arges merely smirked, his fingers tracing Belle's hand with a calculated intimacy that ignored everyone else. Belle's mind whirled as she thought of the Latham family's dark secrets and the bloodlines they required for marriage. Syl watched her, waiting for the explosion of anger he expected when she realized Arges had been deceiving her. But Belle's eyes remained clear as she revealed she knew everything, including the fact that Heidi was a saint and the true key to the Latham legacy. A small, devilish smile played on her lips as she prepared to handle the situation her way. Heidi's hands clenched in her lap, her heart breaking as she realized she was being viewed only as a tool for succession. Belle's internal thoughts were a storm of calculation. She knew the original story cast Heidi as the heroine, but in this life, Belle would be the villain who refused to let anyone be a pawn. She looked at the trembling girl and decided that if they were to be opponents in this grand game, she would first train Heidi to be worthy of the challenge. With a gaze that promised a new future, she offered Heidi a place in her guild, determined to teach her the value of money and independence over the empty promises of men. Lord Syl offered a mask of kindness, his purple eyes gleaming with a hidden, icy ambition as he promised to facilitate Heidi's introduction to the Commerce Guild. Behind the glass of the palace windows, Belle watched the exchange with a wary heart, knowing all too well that Syl wore his ulterior motives like a brand upon his brow. The tension had roots that reached back into the cold corridors of the past, to a moment just minutes prior when the air between the two brothers was thick with unspoken threats. Arges stood like a statue of marble and shadow, his gaze cutting Syl's pretenses as they discussed the illegitimate blood and the desperate scramble for the family's headship. The weight of his lineage and the cruel expectations of his father pressed down on him, yet Arges remained unyielding, his presence suffocatingly regal. Syl's frustration simmered beneath his composed exterior, a snake coiled and ready to strike at the first sign of weakness. Every jewel and thread of Arges's uniform seemed to radiate a cold, lonely power as he stood his ground. Later, amidst the lush greenery of the gardens, Arges's possessiveness flared like a dark flame as he looked down at Belle, his voice dropped into a low, dangerous rumble as he declared her his own. He confessed that he was already facing the greatest challenge of his life, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her heart pound against her ribs. Over tea, the atmosphere softened, though the underlying currents of politics remained as Arges played the role of the devoted fiancé, with a grace that masked his lethal nature. Belle felt her cheeks heat, her heart fluttering at the sight of the man who was supposed to be the story's final boss acting so tenderly towards her. He warned her of the cunning nature of Duke Mountbatten and Syl, urging her to be cautious of the girl now entering her circle. Belle merely smiled, her own eyes sparkling with a calculating brilliance as she looked forward to seeing how the heroine would grow. The following day, the Commerce Guild was a hive of activity, its grand architecture and uniformed staff leaving Heidi breathless with wonder. She was greeted with the Guild's special rose tea, its delicate fragrance a stark contrast to the heavy secrets she carried in her heart. Deep down, Heidi trembled under the weight of her father's command to steal the Secreger formula, her conscience warring with her desperate need for his approval. At the training grounds, the sound of clashing steel rang out as Arges moved with the lethal fluidity of a predator. His opponent, the Knight Glenn, struggled to keep pace with the Duke's godlike prowess and overwhelming strength. However, the mere sight of Belle approaching caused the invincible commander to falter, a momentary distraction that nearly cost him the bout as his focus shifted entirely to her. He quickly pulled her into his space, his touch firm and protective as he dismissed his loss with a smirk, his eyes only for her. The arrival of young William provided a brief, light-hearted reprieve as he mistakenly addressed Heidi as a maid, his innocent praise for her beauty bringing a genuine blush to her face. As they prepared for an expedition to the mountains, Belle's mind was a whirlwind of strategy and concern for the territory's future profits. Arges watched her, his brow furrowed with a protective shadow, as he worried about the expiration of the night contracts and his ability to keep her safe. In the quiet sanctuary of the library, he took her hands in his touch grounding her amidst the storm of political intrigue. He confessed that as long as they had each other, the whispers and judgments of the world meant nothing to him. Memories of a traumatic childhood, where he was branded a monster and a freak by those who should have loved him, flickered behind his eyes like dying embers. He reached out to stroke her hair, his gaze softening with a devotion that bordered on obsession, promising to shield her from such pain. He spoke of the magic tower's ancient power and the tragic fate of his mother, the saint who had violated every taboo for the sake of love. The precarious position of his family depended on his success, but his only true motivation was the woman standing before him. He leaned in and pressed a tender kiss to her forehead, a silent vow that she was his first and only priority in this life, and every life to follow. Me. Belle accepted the gratitude of her masked servant as he bowed before her. Johann reached into his coat to present a small, shimmering gift, revealing a magical hamster familiar that would serve as her new companion. The creature was a rare marvel, a tiny puff of fur with a hidden dimension within its mouth to store her most precious treasures. Though it looked like a simple, squishy toy, its magical utility was assigned immense value. Belle couldn't help but wonder where a mere servant had acquired such an expensive rarity on this continent. Her heart swelled with delight as she cradled the tiny, sparkling creature in her palms. She tapped her chin, pondering a fitting name for something so soft and endearing. With a gentle smile, she decided that Rice Ball was the perfect name for her new friend. She poked the tiny creature playfully, officially welcoming it into her life. Later, the atmosphere shifted from warmth to high-stakes elegance as she arrived at the magic tower alongside the statuesque Arges. Their appearance as a power couple drew every eye, their regal attire shimmering under the sun. Arges explained that the tight security was due to the prestigious triennial recruitment ceremony taking place. His face remained a mask of cold, aristocratic perfection as he looked toward the entrance. Belle recalled the original story, where this very event served as the turning point for the heroine's rise to power. It was here that the most gifted children were selected to lead their families into the future. The stakes were high, as the awakening of magic would transform a neglected noble girl into the Tower Master's most exceptional student. Amidst the tension of the crowd, Arges's sharp eyes caught something moving in Belle's bag, and his brow furrowed when she introduced him to her new pet. She explained it was a gift from Johann, her faithful and mysterious masked servant. A shadow of suspicion and possessive jealousy crossed Arges's face as he questioned how a common servant could possibly afford such a rare familiar. He warned her to be careful of the creature's origins, his voice dropping an octave with a protective edge. Despite his cold warning, Belle tried to show him how adorable the creature was, but he remained stubbornly unimpressed. He flatly refused to acknowledge the hamster's charm, his eyes fixed solely on her. However, his icy demeanor melted for a fleeting second as he leaned in, whispering that in his eyes, she was the only truly cute thing in the world. The sudden, heart-fluttering confession sent a rush of heat to her cheeks, leaving her stunned and breathless. He admitted his irritation that another man had managed to give her a gift before he could. He took her hand, his touch firm and demanding, as he promised to provide her with a gift far superior to anything she had ever seen. His gaze burned with a terrifying intensity, a silent command for her never to refuse the things he wished to give her. Belle's breath hitched as she realized the depth of the possessive obsession swirling in his ruby eyes. She could only sigh at his ridiculous jealousy over a tiny familiar, while the poor creature trembled in fear of its master's intimidating fiancé. The romantic moment was shattered by a voice calling out to Arges, signaling the arrival of the Latham family. The air grew heavy with judgment as the prestigious family stepped forward to greet them. They looked upon Belle with calculated disdain, their eyes cold as they assessed the woman who had captured Arges's heart. Belle stood her ground, maintaining a mask of icy composure as she ignored their biting glares and the weight of their expectations. She moved with the grace of a true countess, offering a perfect, silent curtsy to the man who held her future in his hands. Duke Latham's face was a stone wall of disapproval as he finally met the woman his son had so rashly chosen to engage. The Duchess didn't hesitate to bring up Belle's past, whispering maliciously about her previous pursuit of Arges's brother. Belle didn't flinch, her gaze sharpening with a lethal beauty as she faced the woman sults head-on. She made her intentions clear, declaring with unwavering boldness that she had no interest in the family name, only in the position of being Arges' wife. The Duke's voice was like cracking ice as he told her plainly that he would never approve of their marriage. He expected her to cower in the face of his authority, but Belle only smiled with a dangerous glint in her eyes. She countered his arrogance with her own, stating that his attitude and stance were entirely irrelevant to her. Her defiance was a sharp blade, cutting through the traditions of the high nobility without a shred of fear. To her, the world could scream its disapproval until the end of time, but the onion that held any weight was the one belonging to the man standing by her side. Arges watched her, his expression unreadable, but his gaze never leaving her as she declared that only his feelings truly mattered.